technologies, as well as the legal and regulatory risks and challenges associated with it. I'll now request the esteemed panelists to be seated at the dais. Mr. C.B. Velayuthan, Vice President, Global Sales, Nokia Networks, Nokia. Mr. Ryan Pereira, Vice President and Country Head, Ciena, India. Mr. Ryan Pereira. Thank you, sir. Mr. Rajan Matthews, Director General, COAI. Mr. Sunil Sood, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Vodafone. Mr. Sanjay Malik, Vice President, Head of India Market, Nokia. Mr. Ankit Agrawal, Head of Global Sales, Telecom Products, Sterlite Technologies. Mr. P.K. Bhatnagar, President Technology, Reliance Jio Infocom, and Ms. Lula Mohanty, Managing Partner, Global Business Services, IBM India Private Limited.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here, and I would just request those who are sitting at the back to come forward a bit so that we can interact a little more closely with the panelists. So please do come forward, and there's no limitation, so silver, gold, whatever, you're free to come forward and participate in the discussions over here, so please do come forward. So come on over. Yeah, thank you. Please take these front row seats so that we have a little closer dialogue and don't have to shout through this. Anyway, it's a real pleasure here. We're talking about digital convergence, and I think you can't have a better group of people, experts in the field, who actually do things as opposed to just talking about it. So I want to welcome each and every one of them. And so let me start off with the first presentation. And before I do that, let me just kindly request all of the presenters and participants that when you do your interactions, do adhere to the time limits, right? Because otherwise you disenfranchise some other panelist who then gets at the last part and has to rush through, and it's not fair to them. So please exercise the appropriate sense of fairness to the other participants on the panel so that they can also share what they've come prepared to talk about. So with that, let me have Mr. Velayuthan, Vice President Global Sales of Nokia Networks. Please, you have a presentation. Again, see if you can do that quickly. Please. Presentations are from that particular podium. The clicker is over there as well. So please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Nokia, I thank INC for the opportunity to, talk to you all. With communication, competition, customers converging, the world has to change. And it is changing in a very big way. If you just look back in the last 200 years, we started the industry. Mechanization, it spawned transportation, all kinds of things that landed up coming in with that. When you move on to the next stage of the changes that happen in the world, you look at electricity kind of coming in as being a catalyst in bringing about change in the world. It landed up getting industrialization, mass production, transportation landed up, becoming even better. So there was a huge change in that. As we move on further, a larger change that happened was called as a third industrial revolution, which primarily started from information technology. India, the whole world has benefited a lot from what's been happening around that, which was spawned by, automation being the key driver for that, with PCs, with all kinds of softwares and development that landed up bridging the globe and making that into a smaller place for us to be in. The World Economic Forum defines the fourth industrial revolution as changing the way we live, work, and also how we relate with each other. That's, in terms of that. Some of the technology that's actually will enable that and is already doing that is things like cloud, 5G or ultra broadband. Look at IoT. Look at quantum engineering. Look at nanotechnology. All of these things are actually fusing the physical, digital, and biological worlds together to bring in a new convergence. That's the new convergence that we are talking about, larger than just fixed and mobile converging together. It's a whole different paradigm in terms of what that's happening. Now, for us in Nokia, we see some mega trends that drive this convergence. For example, now as we speak, broadband is everywhere. It's just, landing up to see that actually becoming ubiquitous. Storage, cloud computing, storage is actually becoming prevalent. Infinite capacity is available for us to actually be able to use it. And we almost have a supercomputer in each other's hands now to be able to drive that. So it's profound in that perspective. That Internet of Things, imagine 1 trillion things or sensors being connected to each other. It just opens up new business opportunities and even the way we actually will be able to live. A third point which is important is the whole element around augmented intelligence. Today we are seeing a multiple of tools that we can actually use for decision making, whether on our individual lives, whether it be for industries, or it be for governments. These tools, these processes will actually make knowledge workers be able to go in and do the high value work and let everything else be automated and be able to be driven by decisions done by machines. When we take that further and look at how humans and machines interact, we already see a lot of change. For example, from the way touch phones or touch interfaces actually change the way we interface with machines. Imagine the new changes that can happen with voice, with gesture, even with things like, how we can actually be able to put sensors into clothing and how we actually interact with things like that. Those are going to have a tremendous change, and they're already having that change as we speak now in terms of what we do. When we also look at things like virtual augmented reality, you see the benefits of that actually happening, some of that actually already coming into our lives now, and how we actually work with that. We're all, the enjoyers, we're all actually living in a world of Facebook, Uber, Airbnb, which is all about the trust economy and the sharing economy, where we are willing to actually share our personal information, or of course, around a trusted world of that. That's another area that's actually going to just keep continuously increasing, and we see that actually happening. That another element of that is going to be digital currency. The way we actually look at money is going to change. It's already changing. So that's another trend that's actually driving in terms of what we see going forward. Last but not least, anything and everything that can be digitized will be digitized in the world, in businesses, in processes. So we are seeing that happening, and we're going to see more and more of that happening around. So for us in Nokia, we see these as the large trends that's driving us towards convergence. If you want proof points for that, just have to look at the way the data has actually been growing over the last 20 years. It's going to take 200 years for that to happen. We started in the first phase of just getting URLs and internet. Then moving on to, using the internet to discover content by searching. That was another way that we landed up using data to drive that. We then moved on, and as we moved on, we landed up actually being able to use media. We were actually being able to drive and share media that within each other. And as our trust with the media landed up increasing, we were actually able to share personal information, along with the spawning of e-commerce being a key driver for all of that. These have all been user-generated or consumer-related data that's actually been exploding, and as you can see. And as we now look at the next phase, you're going to see data generated by automating everything, connecting everything, and you're going to see an even more exponential growth in data in terms of what we see. That is the true power of convergence in terms of what's happening in our lives today and how we actually drive that. This now presents a new paradigm for every player in this field, where we'll end up having this big debate on, is this then going to mean the global forces, the global players coming and taking over the whole world? Or are we going to be looking at local players putting up these walled gardens and being able to be actually more ultra-protective? The actual answer for that is going to be an extreme cooperation and an interplay of both these forces. You've got global players with big brands, content that's actually consumable over the world, being generated globally, which will be available and which will be actually be accessible more as we go forward. But at the same time, we have the local stakeholders, whether it be operators, whether it be the government and others, which have a unique value proposition in terms of how they're able to connect with the subscribers, how they're able to bring the local brand, how they can actually bring the context, how they can personalize some of this content in terms of what is actually being consumed. And those things, and also very important, just trust and security. As we'll end up giving in more of our information into the public, these start becoming very, very important elements of where we do. So there is this very clear interplay of how we look at it in terms of being global and local. And this is going to be a new paradigm. It's in how we look going forward with that. Taking that into how networks need to be built going forward to be able to cater to this converged world. We think there are at least 4 elements that everyone who's involved in building these networks needs to keep in mind. Capacity has to be limitless, because that's what's going to drive data. You're going to land up doing it. It's got to be flexible, agile. You've got to land up making sure it is, in all elements of that are there so that you can actually flexibly move data to where it's needed and be able to cater to that. Security is going to be even more of an important thing, and it's going to be the center stage of every conversation that happens in terms of how networks are built. It's going to probably occupy the most in terms of mind share and how we do that. And last but not least, as we look at data being consumed and data expansion, we've also got to make sure that it's efficient. We'll end up having to be able to make more revenue and drive that. So that's going to be another key play in terms of how we do that and how we drive that. We in Nokia have a vision for how the network of the future would be, which already has the building blocks of the networks that we have now. A network where a device ecosystem is available where and when we want to, and how we want to be able to drive that. And the access for that being from a cloud RAN, which has RAN which is on towers but also being distributed across different brands, different connectivity mediums, and also having the same network to be able to be sliced and used for different applications. So that's how we'll end up being able to drive that. A transport medium which has capacity, which is flexible to be able to drive it and be able to use a clear area of how we end up doing that. The core, which is a heart of the center of the network, actually not being in terms of how it is today, but actually a mix of being distributed and also centralized. You need to have the core being at the edge of the network where we need it, so that you can land up making, having content available closer to the user. At the same time, you also need to have a large central network base that you can actually drive from, which brings us to the heart of the network, which is having a software-defined cloud network in the core. It lands up becoming a center stage of the whole network build-out as we look at. From Nokia's side, software is a key part of what we do, so we've actually been focusing a lot on that, whether it be in having a separate unit just to look at applications and analytics, or some of the acquisitions that we've done over the last years. For example, if I look at one of the most recent one, which is Deepfield, it's a software which actually helps in DDoS attacks, so that when we have an attack onto a network, we're able to actually pick it up way before it actually starts creating any damage on the network, and are able to actually prevent that. Or be able to actually have a look at the applications that are running in the network, and thereby being able to manage that network better. If you look at SDN, our Nuage Networks, again, is a network that I can actually very efficiently manage data centers, or look at an SD-WAN network which spans geographies and looks at different enterprises in terms of what we do. When you look at capacity, When we look at capacity, when we look at our radio, we are in the forefront in terms of what we do from a radio technology perspective, whether it comes to massive MIMO or look at carrier aggregation for building more with the spectrum and the capacity that we have. We look at IP networks. We recently launched the FP4, which is a network processing unit, which can actually increase the capacity of your IP network or your core networks by up to 6 times. So there's a huge focus from Nokia side in terms of how we cater to the capacity, security, and also the agility of networks in terms of where we'll end up going with that. I wanted to just sum that up with saying it's all great to be able to build networks. It's great to kind of talk about data growing. But then when we land up actually looking at what some of the applications that are there that can actually affect not just the individuals, because we already are the beneficiaries of a lot of the data world that we are in terms of how we consume, but society in general. I just wanted to pick up a few of the areas that we in Nokia are actually working right now on. For example, in transportation, convergence and mobile broadband can actually solve a lot of issues in transportation today. Do you know that, if I look at even in Europe, in some of the transport, the metro networks that are actually operating today, they have up to 6 different transport communication networks in terms of standards that they have to just communicate between the rails and their different stations and the central network operating center. I mean, it's an incorrigible number of standards that they have and networks that we have. Yeah, and if you look at energy, for example, that's a sector that is ripe for us to look at digitization and to be able to reap the benefits of that. You can save on power in terms of avoiding wastage. If you look at water, you can find out how to optimally be able to use that and be able to save that and store it and be able to manage that. And you can look at all kinds of solutions that that you can actually look at as problems today that can actually be solved with digitization. For example, here in India, we in Nokia worked with Tata Power in Delhi to modernize their entire network of their grid network to be able to bring that into an IP network, to an IP layer, which then brings in more efficiency and visibility for them to be able to operate more efficiently. Urbanization or smart cities helps to actually be able to look at some of the problems in society that we have today and be able to manage that and drive that. Last but not least is healthcare in terms of what you can actually do to solve that. So to just sum up in terms of where we are, data is growing, that we all know in terms of what it is. We've got to make sure we look at networks in a different way in terms of how we build it, but keeping in mind that the benefits of that can actually be immediately translated to solving problems we have in the society today. Thank you all.
Thanks. It's always good to understand how it impacts us. So the applications really is the sauce that keeps it all together. So thank you very much for sharing in the melange of 2 and 3 and now 5. What does all this alphabet soup mean for the consumer and what it is? And I think that's ultimately what's going to mean the critical thing. So thanks for really tying it together for us. I appreciate that. So next we have Mr. Pereira. Please again, we'll request your time constraints be looked at. Thank you.
Do I press this? I just want the front. Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Pereira. I'm the country head for Ciena India. Last couple of days, rather yesterday, today, we've been hearing a lot about, shaping the digital convergence, empowering these billions of Indians with digital connectivity and experience, convergence of various technologies. It is all interesting, right? But when you really think about it, there's something more fundamental we think we need to resolve. That's the connectivity. Until you get the connectivity right, I guess a lot of the other things, going to take its own time. So I really want to focus a little bit more on drill down into connectivity. If the history is anything to go by, it's our operators who's actually going to end up building disconnect networks. The governments can give subsidies, but at the end of the day, it's the operators who's going to build disconnect networks. Now, that requires billions of dollars worth of investment. And if you look at the current financial state of our operators, now, those kinds of investments ain't going to happen in a hurry. So I want to drill down on the key opportunities that we see in India, in fact, for that matter, globally, for the operators, and perhaps discuss how some of the emerging technologies can be used to better monetize the opportunities that we have in front of us, mainly from an operator standpoint. So let me quickly touch on, these are nothing new to you guys, so I'll quickly touch on three broad opportunities, arguably the top three opportunities we have on hand. First is the massive bandwidth growth. Global bandwidth downloads some 260 petabytes per month. And there was an article just a couple of days ago. India's monthly download levels are around 260 petabytes, excluding Jio. So we're way up there with the usage. It's not now just the bandwidth, but also the quality of bandwidth. There's demand for low latency. We all know about that. Last 12 months, India bandwidth downloads grew by 900%. And interesting, at least in the US, we see softening of the net neutrality. So hopefully some of that will come down here and enable operators to differentiate some of those offerings. So I don't think I need to convince you guys of the size of this opportunity, but operators have massive headwinds in this space. The data prices dropped 48%, and then the OTTs control nearly 50%. Rather, if you analyze the international bandwidth, 50% of that bandwidth is consumed by OTTs. So operators not really able to monetize this massive opportunity. Second area is cloudification. We heard from CB and pretty much everyone last day or so, everything that can be cloudified will be cloudified. Again, this is an era of shared economy, so there's no stopping here. Also, opportunities for low latency cloud distribution. But then again, massive headwinds here. OTTs dominate this thing. 38% of enterprise cloud currently held by AWS. When it comes to, again, public cloud, people like Microsoft, clearly controlling the market. And if you look back at the last couple of quarters, the top three operators in the world exiting cloud services and data centers. Verizon sold their data centers to it'll come to me, and sold their cloud services to IBM. AT&T pretty much exited cloud. And then lastly, we got Comcast also selling off their cloud services. So operators not really able to compete with the cloud offerings, at least not on the central cloud, but we hope with the low latency cloud, where you really need to have distributed presence, perhaps they may change the game because it becomes a real estate problem with the number of sites you need. The third opportunity, again, I'm not saying anything new here. Third big opportunity is online advertising, a big $22 billion opportunity. In fact, when you think about it, operators have the best visibility of the users. They know exactly where they are, who they are, and all of that, but yet really no monetization, right? 85% of the online advertising is monetized by Google and Facebook, 85%. But interestingly, though, we've been seeing some very interesting mergers and acquisitions. AT&T bought Time Warner for $85 billion. Verizon bought Yahoo, and Comcast with NBC. So some good mergers and acquisitions, again, trying to go after that segment. Again, like I said, massive headwinds there, and regulatory and privacy laws not quite helping. So what's the point that I'm trying to make here? Three large opportunities, but massive headwinds for our operators. But when you look at it, there's one thing that's common across all these three things. That's the network. We think network is the last remaining competitive advantage for our operators. The last remaining competitive advantage that can be truly sustainable. So unless suppliers like us and the operators work together to really differentiate the network, I think we're going to have bigger headwinds. So for the next couple of minutes, I want to focus on two broad areas in the context of networks that can be, that we can perhaps do in the short to medium term, which can potentially help operators to monetize the networks. Era of building networks to last is gone. You know, if you try to build networks, particularly in India, that is fully NEBS compliant and all of that, you know, you can't really compete. We need to change our design thinking. It's already happening with large operators here. We're already trying to redesign core backbones pretty much with the OTT mindset. We have to design to change. The second area is network automation. Lots of discussions have happened over the last day or so. So in this context, let me quickly double-click on network. Maybe I'll go a little bit more into a bit of specifics on technology to discuss a couple of ideas operators can use to hopefully better monetize these three opportunities. So whether a network diagram from Jio, Bharti, Vodafone, Idea, they all look the same. In fact, if you compare with the architectures of North American or European, they all kind of look the same now. It is about connecting clouds, rather data centers, large data centers, small data centers. And then you'll also see pretty much the servers and then transport networks connecting each other. You know, we commonly refer to this thing as central offices re-architected at data centers. Again, another key thing you're going to see is, like previous speakers spoke, the backhaul networks changing. We're going to have front haul, mid haul, and that architecture is all changing. So I don't want to dwell too much on the specifics of it, but there's one thing very key here. When you have this level of capacities distributed into these edge compute locations and central offices, there's something fundamentally that's going to change in this architecture. That's what we've shown in these rainbow colors. The amount of capacity you're going to need to connect these, previously called exchanges and POPs, going to be way bigger than what we've seen before. Today, in India, according to our estimates, on transport and switching, there's about a $1.2 to $1.3 billion is spent. That's the annual spend, excluding microwave. Little over $1 billion is spent. But once this architecture gets converged, that's going to be significantly higher. Now, we know operators can't afford to spend that way, so definitely there's some changes that's going to be needed. So I want to drill down on two specific things the operators in India can use pretty much now in order to perhaps address some of these issues we have with the scale. Again, before I go to my final piece, another aspect I think we need to look at is our wireless vendors talk very extensively on network slicing. Lots of work had gone into it. But unless the radio level slicing work in concert with transport level slicing, we're probably going to miss the boat. So there's definitely a great deal of work going on in order to get the transport network to work in concert with the wireless network in terms of slicing. Okay, so I said that I want to touch on, lastly, 2 points, 2 specific technologies the Indian operators can use to to better utilize the investments. Let me go through this very quickly. This is the electromagnetic spectrum we learn in our high school, right? So our wireless counterparts have done a great deal of work in mining that spectrum, better utilizing that spectrum in the radio waves. But amount of efforts gone into better utilizing the spectrum inside the fiber has been overlooked for a while. But now it's actually possible. Because we all know in India how much it costs and how much time it takes to put new fiber. So we call this spectral mining, or in fact, we call it liquid spectrum. Now, it was not possible, it's not a new concept, but it was not possible before. We have a lot of fiber, and there's a lot of unused spectrum inside this fiber that go wasted today. But now there's technology available to mine that spectrum. And if the operators can mine that spectrum, they can use that and maximize their revenue. So let me quickly tell you how it can be done. Today, when you build optical networks, you pre-design everything. You leave enough margin for systems to work with full capacity till end of life. What you inadvertently do is leave aside a lot of unused spectrum inside this silicon glass. But we don't need to continue that way. Now we have the technologies like adaptive modulation. You can change the line rates on the fly using software, and also there's a great deal of development in instrumentation. So here's a good example, right? This is how it looked like in the current mode of operation. In fact, if you use these kinds of technologies, you can actually mine up to 60% of excess capacity in your fiber. And imagine Indian operators being able to do that. Of course, as the fiber ages, that usability goes down. So this, again, I want to say this is not going to last forever. As you put more bandwidth, that excess gonna reduce. So this is just one example. This is just one example of many of the emerging technologies that's currently available in the short to medium term. Operators in India can use to maximize the revenue. In Ciena, we've been operating in India for the last 15 years. In fact, our largest R&D center outside the United States happened to be out of Gurgaon, and we do a lot of custom development for the market here. And interestingly, some of the latest stuff we develop, in fact, gets deployed in India before they get deployed in outside world. So that's pretty much, probably skip through this thing, end of my session. I think there's enough technology innovation right now where the operators can use in their connect networks to better monetize the growth and the other opportunities happening right now. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that. Made an interesting point in terms of how networks can differentiate themselves. What's their way of saying, what's the difference? Yeah, are we going to commoditize the network side of the business? And you've given us some thoughts over here. So let me go to one of the key operators here. Sunil, let me come to you. We've been hearing about commoditization, I don't know from when, pipes, dumb pipes, callers, we've heard all these names. So in terms of a converged world, what are we looking at? Mike, please. Microphones at the side.
Sorry. So there are many aspects, and India is a land of contrast. So I'll start from a little basic stuff. At one side, we are rushing for 4G. The data consumption is doubling, tripling every few months. On the other side, we don't know how to make a road, okay, and we have potholes on the road. So I'm just talking about the land of contrast. Now, if we want to reach what he's saying, the first thing is I need to have bandwidth and fiber, right? And connect every cell site, I need to correct households, etc. Do we have the enabling laws to enable that? Point one. So let's come to the real action. Yes, we are battling against all odds, but we manage with the municipalities and the local governments, and we managed to connect some fiber, get some fiber in, we managed to connect some sites, and that's what we're doing. But we are struggling, and it's not only us, it's all operators. It doesn't matter if it's Jio, or if it's Airtel, or if it's Vodafone, or it's anybody. All operators are struggling. So if we need to, first of all, reach our rightful place in the world, we need to get into this convergence era. We need to get into a connectivity layer, which is all pervasive, both in rural India as well as urban India. The first thing we need is enabling laws and permissions and capability. Okay? And I have a very basic solution, which I keep telling the ministers, but none of them get it executed. I just say that with every road, you should have a duct. And that's what everybody does globally. Today you talk about smart cities. It's very easy to say, talk about smart cities. It's nice to hear. But what good is a smart city if there's no fiber? If there's no connectivity? Nothing will work. So let's get it right first. The first thing we need is a connectivity layer, which is all pervasive, across the cities, across the highways, across rural and urban India. And if we need to get that done, we need some enabling laws. Change the definition of what is a road. Have a road definition along with the duct. Let the duct have electricity, let the duct have fiber for telecom, let the duct have gas. That's what the global world is all about. And unless we have those laws coming in, they will keep rebuilding those same highways. And luckily for us, they keep rebuilding the same highways so we can get it done fast. Because in every 3 years, I think every road in India changes. So in 3 years, we can get the whole country connected. That's my first point. And if we manage to do that, then we start looking at the solutions they're talking about, which is convergence. Okay, and we offer, and we take a rightful place. We get all these products in, and I think CB and he have mentioned some of the products that we can offer, and that will change society, will change world, will be able to have the Indian engineers move forward with their technologies and showcase themselves. We have the brains. We just need the right enabling laws and the infrastructure to get it done. And that's my first and basic point. So let's not talk about convergence without getting the step 1 right. We can't go to class 12 without passing class 1. Okay, and class 1 is getting fiber out there or getting some level of connectivity out there. Okay, which is the class 1. So that's first point. Second is, as an operator, what do we look at in terms of convergence? Yes, people are saying, we should just provide the connectivity layer. But if you look at what's happening is, the market is open. Yesterday somebody talked about us missing the OTT space. So somewhere along the line, the operators should have been the rightful guys to enter the OTT space. They did not enter it, and somebody else has taken that land, that space. Today, we have another opportunity. And that other opportunity is this convergence space. Okay? Now, it's up to us as operators to occupy some of those blocks that CB mentioned as opportunities. And we look at those opportunities. In Vodafone, one of the big blocks that we are looking at is the IoT space. Already, we have bought a company called Cobra, which is in Italy, which is the largest automotive company in Europe. Wow. We are already the largest IoT player in Europe. We already have about 60 million SIM cards in IoT, and we run a huge automotive car project across Europe. We are the single largest automotive car player in Europe. If
so
one out of two cars...
Did you say 160 million?
60.
60 million, okay.
Okay. 1 out of 2 cars has a Vodafone SIM card today, which is manufactured in Europe. Okay. But that's our play. Similarly, what we have done in India is we have brought the same, what we call the GDSP platform, which is identical to the European platform in India. Last Friday, in a road show with the startup economy in Bangalore, we announced free trials for all startups for 6 months on the platform, on the IoT platform. Okay, so we are offering 6 months free trials, hand-holding. We also are offering our cloud services free for a limited period, and we're also offering our marketing capabilities free, because that's what the startup world needs. Some of them have great ideas, but they don't know how to finish it off in terms of getting the customer. So we're offering all 3 capabilities. We're also opening up our APIs, and that's a very key part of this convergence world. If you do not open up the APIs, then the developers won't really get the information right. And as he said, that the telecom companies have huge amounts and chunks of information, about the customer. And therefore, by opening up these APIs, we expect to get a lot more ideas coming in from the startup world. So that's our plan. Our plan is to occupy some of those blocks. I won't want to mention each one of them. The first one, we already put a stake in the ground, is the IoT part, which means we go beyond just offering that connectivity dump pipe, as you said, and occupy some of the spaces which this convergence world would lead to. Okay, so
we're not going to allow the next WhatsApp to eat our lunch.
Absolutely not. This time we are going to have the lunch and the dinner.
Thank you.
The rest can have the dessert.
Okay, thank you, sir. And for the media that's here, please, the headline is not that Sunil okayed the digging up of Indian roads every 5 times. Okay, that's not the headline he was saying. Okay, let's go to Mr. Bhatnagar, sir. You're at the new entrant point that has come in with LTE and 4G networks all over. What are you seeing in terms of this convergence? You've also been one of the sort of innovators, if you will, of bundling everything together up front and saying, here it is, go to, be it entertainment, music. Others have done it later on, but you've sort of done it up front. So please tell us, what do you see in the convergence world?
So I think what is most important is to understand what is motivation for convergence, because we were talking about convergence in this entire conference. Convergence, as you all know, has been a requirement or a wish list as a kind of a magic bullet that would solve all our problems and would take us with a single solution, solve all the things that really we need to do in terms of entertainment, education, and all the physical activities in industry, in personal life, and so on. So the reason for this objective of convergence is essentially to create a foundation. And the foundation has got several layers. The first aspect is to convert everything that we do and work upon into bits and bytes. And once we are able to ultimately convert everything into bits, then it becomes a common way of dealing with them. So that is how the idea of convergence really comes about. And that's the very reason why we really started out by having an entirely 100% digital network. The first goal that we kept in front of us, that whatever we do in the network, it should not be a mixed network, it should not be a combination of circuit switched and packet switched. It should be one single network, all consisting of bits and bytes. And once we understand that, then we really get a solid foundation for convergence. Because then everything else that we do, ultimately we have to convert into bits and then transport them over long distances. And in the past 1 year, India has really succeeded in coming as one of the top consuming nations, data consuming nations in the world. So this really shows that the Indian industry, the operators are capable of creating superlative capacities for the entire country, both in terms of capacity as well as coverage. And if we consider this as a platform to launch our future endeavor, then that would be the right way to go. And that is why I am very optimistic about this convergence theme and the possibility of doing certain things in the future, and not really in the past, in the distant past, but in the immediate future that would be pretty much even unimaginable today. So what are those aspects? One has been just mentioned about the Internet of Things. Because once we connect people, then the next natural extension is to connect machines, sensors, hidden eyes and ears all over the country in different processes and different systems, so that we really get massive amounts of data. And we are, in fact, building the platform to carry the data. But the next aspect would be, how do we process this data? How do we build useful and meaningful applications for people and for the social good also? And one important aspect, of course, of IoT is in terms of automobile industry. But in the Indian context, there would be several major social uses of the IoT. one of the major one being agriculture, because India, as we all know, depends heavily even now on agriculture in our economic growth. So the possibility of being able to employ these sensors to measure the soil moisture, to look at the weather, that has got enormous possibilities of improving the productivity of agriculture. So that, I think, is the number one application from the social point of view. The second important application of IoT that I believe would come arising out of this convergence and the concept of IoT would be with regard to security, because today we live in a world where security is paramount and we are all anxious about our immediate well-being. So IoT in terms of sensors for security would be the next big step. And once we have taken these two steps, then of course there are other steps like healthcare and a whole lot of stuff, including traffic control and things. So the next big move, apart from connecting 1.25 billion people with high data throughput, is also about connecting far bigger number of devices all through the country. So that is what I believe is the next step in convergence that we will take. The other important thing is to understand why are we talking of this fourth industrial revolution, or this aspect of this high growth, and why we are all really very much optimistic about it. The reason I believe it is so is that several things have come together to really fuel this whole thing. We have built a platform of rapid capacity being transmitted across the network. We have become a data-consuming nation of the highest order. But beyond that, what is important is that many technologies which were in the lab or which were in academic domain, like artificial intelligence, like robotics, and like virtual reality, all those things have suddenly, over time, have evolved to a stage where they can be mass implemented. So artificial intelligence now has reached a stage where it can reach to multiple people. It is no longer something, a novelty in the labs. Similarly, the possibility of harnessing the power of the electromagnetic waves has grown multiple folds, and that is the second big reason why we are talking about convergence. Then, in addition to that, we have the benefit of a regulatory framework which has now come of age in the past 2 decades. We have a positive push in terms of policy. We have a whole lot of innovation, and we have all these new technology blocks which have just come out of lab and really ready for mass deployment. So you can consider it as if you now have a set of constellation stars which are very auspicious and which can really take us to the future in a faster way. So I think that is the basic idea behind how we can move forward.
So good message around Navaratri, I guess, when all the stars are aligning, etc. But Mr. Bhatnagar, let me sort of give this analogy. You know, when roadways were being built, the physical roadways, they came up with this phenomenon. The better the roads are, the more congested they got. Because people found it, hey, great, I can get from here to there, and more cars came, and congestion started, and, so the question becomes from an operator perspective, the better you get, faster people want to use it, right? And so are we ever going to be able to afford the type of spectrum demands that are going to be put on the industry? Because in India, that last mile is always going to be pretty much spectrum, right? So what do we see our ability to be able to keep up? The better we get, it's going to be, whatever, the faster, better, quicker, whatever. So what are we seeing in terms of this converged activity?
Necessity is the mother of invention, as we all know. so as people's appetite to consume grows, as people really innovate in new ways. For example, as we all know, these cars without drivers. This was something like a fiction to me, I think, a couple of years back. I never imagined that we would very soon have cars without drivers. And in no time, even without we could realize it, it became a reality. So what really really happens is that when the technology growth becomes viral in a sense, then really it grows at a pace which is not linear, which is in fact in a kind of a geometric progression. And what I believe this whole thing will lead us to is a kind of open systems and open networks. The development, the stage of development in terms of our network infrastructure and elements, in terms of the servers that currently house our data centers, is at the moment very primitive and very much in a siloed way, dominated by a few players, few vendors. What I see as a engine for quantum growth would be when, just like the open source software, we are able to create open source systems, open source networks through hardware which is no longer proprietary, in which the community can contribute, and that is how the genius of the people as a collective and collaborative manner would really flower. So that is how I think we will really grow beyond what we really believe we can.
So let me come back to you. Are we going to get Uberized?
Are we going to get?
Uberized. I was saying is that a complete asset-light model, you know. I was saying is that, you know.
No, but I completely agree with him, and you know, that's what we're talking about, that hardware will be commoditized. It's the software which is really going to work, and that's what you're talking about when you're saying NFN and all these new technologies which are going to come, which is basically using a commodity radio with the intelligent software behind it, or an intelligent brain behind it. And one has to go, my question to these so-called vendors sitting next to me is, when are they going to enable that to happen? Because it means, you know, they get Uberized, not me.
Sanjay, the gauntlet is done. So let me go to Lula. Lula, I mean, obviously you're in the business of helping Sunil and you know, Jio and all of these guys. Obviously had a big contract from them recently, I understand. And so tell us, what are you thinking about in helping operators answer these types of questions that are emerging?
So I have been duly forewarned that, you know, we are the consulting GAN and, you know, the real work gets done by them. So I will stick to a very simplistic point of view. Yeah? In my role as looking at digital transformation across multiple industries, I just wanted to lay a couple of thoughts on, you know, where we see the industry converging in the context of telcos. I think, look, when we speak about convergence, that word particularly is not new to this panel, because telcos have been talking about convergence for the last 2 decades almost, right? It's voice and data, it's IT and network, you know, it's wireline and wireless, and there's been various formats of convergence. I think what is different now is, you know, this is about the consumer becoming the center, at the center of this convergence. This convergence is no longer good to have, you know, an opportunity to do better in what you're doing, but the expectations are defined externally. The consumer is defining the demand. The consumer will define your success. The consumer will define your satisfaction. So I think that is the new in this digital convergence that we are talking about. It suddenly, you know, thrives on you're not, you know, how good you are as an operator or, you know, as a career, etc., becomes almost redundant, because you are now being compared to the best practices in the industry. So it's a best consumer strategy. Doesn't matter whether you are a telecom company, you know, it is, you are going to be compared to an Amazon or to a Walmart. A best product strategy, you're going to be compared to a Netflix or a Comcast or whatever. You know, the best run analytics, again, content provided at your fingertips, etc. So to that, what we are seeing as we work through, you know, Sunil and, you know, many other such players in the market today, I think there are 5 imperatives to take strive on this digital convergence. The first one is, you know, obviously consumer experience excellence. We are actually seeing that manifest in the way we are today, you know, providing service. Earlier on, the best we could do about having a superior differentiated consumer experience was to build a state-of-the-art CRM system, let's say, or a state-of-the-art billing system, or right now, trust me, I'm in the middle of some very massive digital transformations in telcos and banks and retailers. The starting point is a consumer journey. So you think about the various moments of truth for a consumer from the time he wakes up to the time he goes to bed. Yeah, and I think that is defining what is going to be a service, at various strengths. The context is shifting. I was talking to users. It doesn't matter to them whether it is, Vodafone or Idea or Bharti, or whether the network is Huawei or, Ericsson or Nokia. It is how good was this experience for me. So to Sunil's point, fundamentally, yes, connectivity. But then how relevant was it? How differentiated? So I think first and foremost is, consumer experience, differentiated, versatile, real time, meeting them at the point where they are. The second one, I think, is fundamentally shift your mindset to become a technology or a product provider as to become a solutions provider. So it's about agility in network, agility in building platforms, etc. I will not go to the details because I think there is nobody more knowledgeable than this panel here. But there are multiple things that one can actually start to explore in making these nimble and providing them as a service as needed. The third one, of course, I think we talked about it a lot yesterday and even today, is leveraging the ecosystem. It's not about getting in the way, but it's about providing a continuum to the customer right from the time they experience you to the brass tacks of where the network is. And that is where you have to identify your sweet spots and partner with the ecosystem. There are multiple examples right now. And I think there's no perfect way. It's about catching that opportunity quickly and then becoming as pervasive. I was in Singapore talking to one of our digital banks, and they are completely dependent on, carriers out here to be digital only. Or, if media and, video has to be, people like Netflix will always look at. So I think this whole leveraging the ecosystem is fundamental. And then you come down to the brass tacks, which is obviously, taking costs of the enterprise, because this convergence is going to be pervasive. You will not able to give a superior customer experience unless you have, figured out what to do with your sunk investments in the infrastructure, etc. I think that's the other area, which is, about this. And fifth is enterprise transformation. Your business processes have to change. The enterprise culture. When we surveyed, CXOs of, telecom companies, it's what's coming in the way. It's just the modularization of everything that you're talking today. Take network components out and expose them, right? I mean, it's having new ways to work. It's leveraging the cloud and all of that. So primarily, I think these would be the 6 major imperatives that we see. I mean, just to package this very, very quickly, the way we look at transformation is A, new focus areas, which is talk to the customers, they will show you the way, which is going to be your next new revenue stream. We have seen that. I mean, time permitting, I can go through multiple examples how jewelers have converted themselves, retailers have converted themselves, banks are becoming, marketplaces and, financial superstores, etc. The second way is, obviously market activation. You have to be equally into social listening and, create your own camps of excitement. The third one we say is new expertise, which is creating a front end is great, but creating a back end that can sense and respond. So in the context of telcos, huge opportunities in IoTs and blockchain and data. I mean, you own data today. Very soon customers will say device is not, device is incidental. Having a connectivity is an entitlement. It's the content that I'm getting for myself. It's like what, it's almost as good as a utility today. You don't pay for the water pipe, you pay for water consumption. We were talking to Ryan, earlier. So I think it's the new expertise, which is creating the supply chains that can sense and respond. And then obviously leveraging talent and, a more developed ecosystem. So in a nutshell, that's where our thoughts are around.
So Lula, let me push back a little bit. Sunil talked about leaving dessert for somebody else, but I'm hearing you say, he'll have the dessert and somebody else is going to have the lunch. For example, by asking the consumer, you think Apple would have gotten to where it did? Right? You think Uber would have got to where it did? I mean, that's the type of thing that's going to eat his lunch, right? The rest is dessert. What we're talking about is talking to our people and, yeah, sure, we'll move this thing along. Sure, we'll, get margin and we'll do things better and we'll have world-class things. But I'm not sure that, what Sunil is talking about is eating the main course here, So how do we get there? I mean, we're really talking, these, what are you saying? How do we get Sunil prepared for, as I said, an Uberization of his network? Get the simple network issues here. Could you just get the microphone working, please? Yeah, thank you. Sunil, yeah?
No, I'm just saying, ultimately, the new disintermediation is all about creating efficiencies. And I look at it this way, and I just have a dilemma for this audience. Okay, for example, when we first started our business, the mobile disintermediated the landline because the landline gave a connectivity to every house, and the mobile worked on probability of you wanting to make a call on the air and then gave you that connectivity. And therefore, it disintermediated the landline because there was huge wastage of having a fixed line going to your house. Today, we're now saying that the landline assets are back valuable because now we need fiber. Okay? And we are going back to saying that I need to connect every house and I need to connect every BTS or every site. And we are again digging the roads to put massive amounts of fiber because we have a data tsunami coming in, and therefore we need to connect, go back to the landline. Isn't that something wrong somewhere? So somewhere along, one technology guy will come and say, no, I don't need anything on the ground. Why not on the air? I'll be back again and say, okay, let's use satellites. Now, India's, for example, put in multiple satellites in the air simultaneously just a few months back, right? Now, why would not these technologies come in, and then everybody who's sitting on the fiber would get disintermediated? It would have a huge wastage of fiber lying on the ground. So it's ideas like this. I'm just giving an idea. But it's ideas like this which will disintermediate and remove inefficiencies. Because ultimately, putting and connecting a piece of hard fiber with everything is no different to what happened in the landline on the back, beyond 20 years back. Right? The same thing is happening all over again. So somebody will come up with these new technologies, somebody will come up with these new capabilities which can have huge amounts of data over the air, and the whole investments off the ground, which is under the ground, could get wasted. So I said, these are the challenges we face. Everybody's working more on here and now. Okay, today I need to carry this tsunami of data. What's the best way? Oh, I need hundreds of kilometers of fiber. Let's dig it up, let's put it in, and let's connect it. And then we come to the technology companies who give us better and better capabilities to handle more and more compression capabilities of handling more and more data. But these are things that will happen. And these are things that will disintermediate us, or whatever our current thoughts are, because these are going to be emerging technologies that will still come. So ultimately, I think it's all about creating efficiencies and removing wastage. And I completely agree with Lula about the current principles of convergence, and I completely buy her point. Those are the challenges we face on a daily basis. How do we move our organizations to a digital age? How do we move the individuals who are, maybe from a different generation back to the digital era, or they get disintermediated? Our own employees are getting disintermediated, in a sense.
Yeah, so
that's
Lula,
the challenge we face.
IBM, sold to sued. I mean, great. This is what he says he's looking for. Yes.
The beauty of all this is ultimately we all align. But I think, he is right. I think the dichotomy of this, and nothing is easy. It's always easier said than done. Is somewhere along telcos are becoming bimodal. It's not just an India phenomena. We are talking even worldwide. It's to be a digital service enabler. Somewhere along, unless you get into that enablement platform, someone else will eat, and then to become the digital service provider, which is a little more difficult, but top of the mind recall. Nothing like I only need Vodafone to do everything. You would do a call, you can buy, you can shop, that's where I was.
Yeah, that's where I completely buy her point. Because the whole convergence era is actually mobile first. Yeah. The whole convergence era is mobile first, and mobile is going to be controlling whatever you wanted to do. So that's a real huge opportunity which we as operators have.
Yeah, and Sunil, clearly, you're too young to know anything about the landline side. So, I think our generation probably knew about landline. So you're talking mobility, and mobility was probably what your first experiences were. But I see Sanjay here. Sanjay, I mean, Sunil made some comments about you guys, so you're on the hook now, Sanjay. Come on. What are you going to say?
Guys who are really going to make it work, right? So can I use the podium?
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
I hope, Sanjay, you're going to talk about SDNs, and I hope you're going to talk about SDNs and how you're going to give us all these radios free. At least the hardware.
The pressure is on. He's talking about Uberization already.
Now, Sunil is going to say that make it work in 6 months or 1 year.
And software, anyway, after you sell the first one, the rest is free.
Yeah, I think picking up some.
Listen, we need him back for IMC 2, please, Sanjay. Go ahead, Hazen.
All right, so before I start, so first of all, thanks CUI and Department of Telecommunication to kind of make this event such a spectacular event. So just picking up some of the things which came up, and I think I know that we always think about immediate things, but we have to think about convergence a little bit more than the fiberization, right? So, Sunil, I definitely agree with you that as on today, if the first thing is that we have to make the backhaul right, and first thing is we have to do the fiberization, and why can't we do it with the road? Very, very valid question, very, very valid point, which has to be taken care of. But at the same time, if we look at the era which is coming up, it is more than the digital services which are there today, right? Today, if you look at it, maybe 70%, 60% is the video application, right? And in that also we have seen the convergence from the content to the devices to the network and connectivity. But if we look at what's the stage which is coming up later, and this is what again you also covered, Sunil, CV also covered, that yeah, if we look at some of these applications which have to really touch the human lives of not only the top 100 million, but maybe the next 1 billion. And that is something which will, again, take the convergence also to the next level. So just an example, that today, if you look at in India, I think about 5 million people die because of the human errors, because of whether the right report is not coming, whether doctor didn't have the access to the record, and whether some challenge like that. And that is, again, part of that 1 billion people, right? And I think whatever we talk about Digital India, whatever we talk about the vision which we have, again, we have to somehow make sure that our convergence story touches these 1 billion people. I'm sorry, maybe I'm touching a little bit of an emotional topic, but I just wanted to kind of put that in the context. So there, I think if we have to really take the convergence to that level, that basically talks about convergence between sensors, devices, whatever is the medical equipment, to the connectivity, to the kind of a fat pipe, and then getting into the analytics and getting into the big data kind of analysis which has to be done. And that's where the convergence goes across, right? It starts from the sensor devices and goes up to the kind of analytic of those, and after that maybe the remote surgery which we are talking about. Now I know some of you can say, Sanjay, what the hell are you talking about, that today maybe 50% of the population is still not having access to basic health care, and here we talk about kind of remote surgery. But I think that's where I think we have to work together to take the technology, take this convergence to help those 1 billion people and improve their lives. And again, little bit which was covered in the CV's presentation also, that's where we are as Nokia are building the ecosystem. And yeah, consulting is a good business, but we are more into providing the real boxes. So whether we talk about all the application tools, analytics tools, whether connectivity, again 4.5G, 4.9G, which helps in kind of moving this data fast enough. So if we, and that's where we have to think again end to end, right? And this is something, and again, you can talk about applications like water wastage, talk like pollution, talk about applications like food wastage, what happens in our country. So I think we, as leader of this industry, people in this room, we have to collectively think of finding ways of solving these kind of national problems also, along with the video application and along with other things. And I think today, if we are really successful in this industry, and I don't know, 650,000 BTS or 1 million BTS, whatever we say, but ultimately I think we should recognize the people, the riggers who went up 40 meters on the tower to really put that antenna. And we owe that. If we talk about the healthcare, we have to take care of lives of those people, their family members, and maybe even the lower economic strata. And that's the thing where, again, various kind of stakeholders, whether it is regulators, whether it is, again, the connectivity providers like us, the IT providers, then at the same time, the sensors and all that, we have to really make sure that we come out with the right standards at this moment, so that, again, we don't get into the similar situation that we have the road, but we don't have the fiber. So if we think about that today, that if we have come out with the standards across all these areas, that is the way which we go forward. And that's where, again, without using too much of sales pitch here, Nokia is really taking the leading position in defining the standards and getting the ecosystem to make it work. So Sunil, to come to your point, I can't define whether it is 6 months or 1 year, but this is for sure that we will help all the operators here to make it work. Thank you.
Yeah, convergence with care. Good point. So you want to say something?
No.
So let me go to Ankit. Ankit, sorry for keeping you on tenterhooks for so long. You've heard all of these statements, and of course, people have been talking about fiber. You're in the fiber game, I'm sure. So you've been selling fiber. So what does convergence mean for you folks?
So I think, first of all, it's fabulous to be on a panel where one of your biggest customers in the world is taking out half of my speech. So thank you for that, Sunil. Absolutely dead on in terms of, there is a gazette issued by JS Deepak to make right away a lot simpler, a lot faster, deemed approvals. I think we just need to get all the chief ministers in a room and find a way to make it happen at the ground level. So I'm fully with you, Sterlite's with you, and if all the operators can find a way to make this happen, I think it will be game-changing for the country. So I'm fully with you. Thank you for that. So for the half of my speech that's left, I'm going to just talk a little bit about Sterlite, talk about what we're seeing in the world in terms of fiber networks, and obviously, ultimately, what we're going to see in India going forward. In terms of Sterlite, we've repositioned ourselves and we've really thought about that. Transforming lives by delivering smarter networks is what Sterlite's all about. And I think that fits very well in terms of the convergence theme that we're also talking about today. We come from a company where our chairman was the first Indian, Mr. Anil Agarwal, to commit 75% of his wealth to charity. That's the kind of belief that we believe, that every single thing that we do must be for society. And I also believe that the ultimate aim of this convergence theme and everything that we're working on, and how do we provide solutions to help not just the common man in India, but really the man in rural India. So I think that's really where a lot of our efforts are going on. I think tremendous efforts by the government to put forward BharatNet. And I just want to touch upon BharatNet for a couple of minutes because I think it's not well understood enough. The first thing is it's not just a $10 billion program by the government. The important thing to understand is that while everyone gets excited about GST and the impact it can have, GST will have an impact of just 1.5%. BharatNet standalone will have an impact of between 3.5% to 5% on our country. So this is the importance of this project that we believe can be game-changing for our country. And Sterlite, and I believe all our players sitting here, are absolutely committed to make that project a success. We believe that there are solutions that we can offer that can fasten the deployment. We believe in Sterlite itself, we have solutions that you can deploy faster, 3 times faster than anywhere else in the world. And this is something that we believe we can make in India and make it happen at a speed which has never happened before. In terms of what we're seeing around the world, I just want to share that clearly, globally, people have realized that just Sunil's talking about, the core network is absolutely the basic thing that needs to get built out. Recently, Deloitte put out a report which I thought was phenomenal to say that a country that we believe is as advanced and we would believe has the networks already, but they said that US needs $130 to $150 billion of deep fiber networks. This is not on 5G, this is not on IoT, this is not M2M. This is just pure fiber networks that need to get rolled out. $130 to $150 billion over the next 5 to 7 years. Japan just announced that they're going to put in $50 billion over the next 5 years to make the fiber and the 5G networks happen. China, the MIT government just announced $400 billion that needs to get deployed over the next 8 years just to make a network ready to be 4.5G/5G ready. And just on a side note, every given year, every single year, China is deploying 10 times to 12 times more fiber networks than what India is deploying. Hopefully with all the efforts, definitely of all the operators as well as BharatNet, I really hope that this we can catch up, because I believe more than the GDP divide and the economic divide between India and China, the digital divide will be the biggest killer and will be the biggest differentiator between India and China going forward. As per our estimates, while China is talking about $400 billion, the amount of catch-up that India needs to do on providing a high-quality 4G and eventually a 5G network is close to the order of $80 to $100 billion, which needs to get deployed in the next 5 years. I think a tremendous amount of support is definitely required from the government. We need to find solutions on the spectrum, but equally on the bare-bone fiber network, which needs to take to every single tower, it needs to go to every single small cell and every single convergence point. This is absolutely the need of the hour today. On a lighter note, Rajan, I believe that there is a solution for convergence even at this hall. I was just looking at that we have 8 cameras here recording exactly the same event. So there's clearly a need for a convergence out there. I also believe that the back half of the hall is not filled, and so possibly there's a sensor network that can switch off those lights and save that kind of energy. And as Sterlite, we're continuously investing in startups and new age companies that are providing these solutions exactly to rural India. We've invested in one of India's largest telemedicine company. We invested in India's largest skill development company online called Adda 24/7. And we're also looking at solutions of companies like FarmMart. FarmMart is a phenomenal company which probably no one's heard of, but it provides solutions and sensors at the tractor level in rural India. And through an app, you can at any point rent your tractor in your neighborhood on the hourly basis. So that's the kind of solutions that are already out there. In that situation, it was working actually on a Vodafone network, and it's gone absolutely viral. So I believe that the time is now. I believe that all of us need to find solutions that can help the common man, but more importantly, in rural India. And we're absolutely committed at Sterlite to make that happen. Thank you.
Ankit, you've just made 4 cameramen very nervous just now, so don't worry, it's...
You aren't going to be disintermediated. No, but I just want to add, you see, it's not that we don't have our vision right. The Prime Minister's vision of Digital India is bang on, just like these other countries are focusing on the on data. It's just that we've got to go to the next steps and we've got to evolve, simplify our rules, the ease of doing business part, so that we can enable that vision to really come true. So, you know, it's not that our guys don't have it right, they are bang on also. It's just that we need the next level of enabling laws to make it happen. There are some steps, like you said, J.S. Deepak talked about the ROW law, which is now being implemented across the states. But we're going to go a step further. Just, you know, that's just a law. I'm saying a little different. Just make sure the definition of a road is a road plus a duct. And that's what changes the game. That's what disintermediation is all about. Simplify the game. Just make sure that every road has a duct. And that's all you need. And that in 5 minutes you can connect any house. In 5 minutes you already have the fire. You can blow up any fiber. That's what we need.
Thank you. So let's open it up to the audience here, part of the reason we are here is to also get your inputs. So you heard some very interesting comments about convergence, comments that you'd like to ask or make to the panelists in terms of convergence. Put your hands up. Identify yourself. Yes, Deepak, please. Microphone to him, please. Go ahead. Shout.
I can. And trying to? Okay.
For example, the basic we are talking about the LTE. LTE is nothing, is end-to-end IP system. But again, what we are doing, IP is all tied up with the one pole, one location. And we are just putting the things on the mobility. So now what I'm just trying to make it a point, the time has come when we have to redefine the fundamentals. That's the IP, LTE, CPIP, and all those things over there. Where the mobility is the prime, and the special case the fixed one. I don't know whether any research is going on in this direction or not. That's one. Second thing, 70 to 80% has gone video. But what we are doing, we are taking the standards, mechanical standards, and compressing the videos accordingly. But again, why don't we think of how the brain makes the picture? Moment to do how the brain makes the picture. For example, I'm looking at you. Close my eyes. Your image is already there with me for next 3 seconds. If I use those techniques and try to do that, perhaps I can compress the data to the tune of 50 or 70%. Now, the thing is that what I'm looking from the operator's perspective, don't become just a pipe provider. You have the greatest strength. Rajan will be very happy to listen to me. Normally we are always cross.
No, never.
Never. Thanks. Thanks. Okay. Because we are the old guys. I was working with the Tatas. He was in COI. So that's what we had like this. Okay. Now, what I'm just trying to make it a point over there. Look, the biggest depository of any data, which are reliable data, personal data, that is with the telecom operators. And telecom operators do operate the services on behalf of the government of India, getting under the license. So you are the most disciplined operators anywhere in the world. Now, what I can depend on you as a telecom operator, not on the Googles and Facebooks and all those. They are the outside entities over there. Now, why don't we try to work in a cohesive manner, saying, hey, look, we are there to take care of data, and now give us the way to monetize the data. And we don't monetize the data. So data monetization and all those things. Second thing is that OTT is coming, that's great. Unknowingly, I press my button and say, I accept everything on the Android. They have the Android ID.
If you don't, it won't work.
No, that's the thing which I'm trying to make it a point. Now the thing is the entire ecosystem has to be changed because I know only one and one, that's my telecom operator. Now you have to define, we have to define the laws of the game where we say, well, this data is required only for this application, not everything on my handset. So perhaps the radical changes are required to be done. And perhaps COI and others can work on that with the telecom operators to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, firstly, I thank you for your support and your trust on telecom operators. And I wish I had all customers like you who trusted us implicitly for keeping their data safe, which we do, by the way. You know, lots of people get attacked in the last cyber attacks, but the telecom operators still kept their head above water. And it's not that we did not get those attacks. But I think, your ideas are great, but my suggestion would be is, whether telecom operators follow your ideas or not, you should work with some startups, and startups need mentors like you. It's a combination of the young and the old, which actually creates the ideas and is able to execute on the ground. So I would suggest that, you should take up a mentorship program to go beyond just suggesting in a free way to people like us.
Well, Sunil, I'm doing that, but again, the market access is a big problem. Because all the operators are tied up with the Ericsson, the Nokias, the Siemens, and this and that. and moment somebody goes, that's the biggest failure of the.
I just gave you an opening by telling him that he's got to commoditize his hardware.
So let's just, I think Sanjay wants to say something, and then let's see if he can
I
get
think
some.
just carrying similar kind of aspect there, but I think one thing, yes, operators, you say that it is bit pipe provider and only that, but at the same time that pipe is becoming heavy, pipe is becoming stronger, right, and wider. And applications on that, whatever can come, is going to be again fueling the growth. So whatever, let's say, the fiber to home, which Jio and PK Bhatnagarji has taken the lead on, that is something. If you get that fiber to home, that pipe is going to become growing at a tremendous speed as we go along. And that's where you will start monetizing it, right? So I would say that even if it is a bit pipe provider, but still the strength around that, the applications around that is going to make operators stronger.
PK, you want to say something, PK?
Any comment on that?
Yeah.
I wanted to just come back to your first question, if I understood it correctly, and that was about the TCP/IP in the context of LTE. If I understood it correctly, you were asking as to what needs to be done in the context of the LTE or the mobile networks. As we all know, TCP/IP was framed during the days when there was no thought of mobile networks. And now what we have done is we have married LTE with the TCP/IP, which existed, the standards existed prior to when the LTE came or when mobility became ubiquitous. So there, of course, what has happened essentially is that there are now solutions where the TCP/IP is optimized in the context of mobile. So now, so there are not that there are no solutions. There are solutions now in the marketplace, which allows you to consider the fluctuating nature of the RF signal and understand its impact on the TCP/IP standards which were built earlier, and then optimize it in the context of mobile. If that was your question, that I think I have tried to answer it.
Thank you. Yes. So thanks, PK. No wonder you're heading up Jio's technology side. So any other questions? We have a couple more minutes, so put your hand. Yes.
Thank you, Rajan. And good evening, everyone, and the audience and the panelists. I am Vikas, and my simplest question is which place is the most secure place? Is the road or the ICU? So I think Sunil and Sanjay, the business starts with the telecom operator. I had an almost 1 decade journey spent with Bharti, and prior to that with Government of India. Now you won't be surprised that we have deployed Delhi Wi-Fi in a span of just 4 days. Entire India Gate, Lal Killa, Qutub Minar, Humayun Tomb, all the archaeological sites have been Wi-Fi'd with high-speed internet of 100 Mbps provided by the MTNL, so-called, earlier people used to renown MTNL like Mera telephone nahi laga. So we have availed that fiber and enabled the 100 Mbps, and here is the IBM sitting, Lola is just sitting over there. They arrived as a bride and operator like a groom. Now they become Pandit and run away from the hardware business. And we have deployed 19 data center, hundreds of data center with the hardware. So same journey now today, everybody is talking about fiber, fiber, fiber. No, where is the data security over fiber? Where is the more revenue monetization mechanism coming across? Where is the location-based services? Like fiber is like an arteries and the veins in our body. Everywhere is fiber. Where is the revenue and monetization system? I burned my $120 million. We are a small company, but we learn there is a huge learning fee. After IIT Delhi, we spent Government of India to understand government for 4 years, then moved to United Nations to understand international governance for 4 years. Then I started my own. So where we are landing? Means nobody is giving us the data security and monetization. My network should be my. Why my network would be handed over to operator? So I think Sterlite is sitting right away. Data security, fiber security, data integrity, and the availability of our network should be there. So I think operator is sitting right away, fiber deployer is sitting right away, and intelligent business machine, which become the now intelligent business machine rather than international business machine. Your intelligence is definitely there. We have learned processes, setting up the high-level processes, filling with the standard operating procedures. We guys are following the work instructions. We want a result in terms of monetization of revenue. We ourselves spend and rely on the government, but we are not monetizing our network. How the biggest network, world biggest network, Vodafone, can help us?
We have the same problem. We have the same problem. We are also trying to earn some money and monetize our network.
Meeting is over.
No, Rajan, 1 second. Sir, if this is what the convergence required, I will give my SSID to Vodafone. We want and monetize. You can take our 3,500 access point right away. I can sign off.
I'm saying the other way around. You take my network, give me some profits.
Okay, G, you just give us. I am ensuring. Though we are very small, we are $120 million company. I can sign away, and Rajan, you will be the guarantor for this. Thank you.
Yeah, I just gave 75% of my wealth to charity.
I just want to. I just want to give.
But these are the challenges, which we face in India, and it's not that you or me or whatever. Then ultimately there have to be monetization models which allow you to recover your investments, and that's why people will more and more invest in this ecosystem. Ultimately, it's a matter of creating an ecosystem which is connected to each other ecosystems. And that's how the whole convergence works. And ultimately, everybody has to be able to monetize that ecosystem, whichever he is connected to. And that's how it will work.
Ankit, you're willing to give your business to him? Is that what you're about to say?
No, something better. You asked about two parts. One is security, and the other one is in terms of monetization. I want to give you an example of security. We have been fortunate enough to work with the government and the NFS. We have built India's probably global most secure fiber network, which is a completely intrusion-proof network at the J&K border of 10,000 kilometers. That's the kind of network that Sterlite has built, completely designed in India, made for India. And it is completely intrusion-proof to the extent that even someone tries to tap that fiber, immediately, one, that person doesn't get any data, and secondly, you are immediately able to know at the knock where the fiber has been tapped. So such solutions are there, already been deployed for defense, and I give you that guarantee that if the right solutions are deployed, there is complete security on the network as well. Second point, on the monetization, I think one of the best examples we have is with Verizon. Verizon is currently deploying in 6 cities in the US, including Boston and Sacramento. And what I can tell you is they have taken a view that as long as they're getting right of way, instead of a normal 48 fiber count, they're putting 1700 fiber count in their ducts, because they have realized that there are 5 key applications of tomorrow that they can monetize, which includes 5G, which includes fiber to the home, fiber to the enterprise, DAS, small cell, as well as leasing of dark fiber to other services, including city and others. So this is a clear example of monetization which is already happening in the Western world. It needs to get Indianized, it needs some level of jugaad to find a way to make it Indian. But I think there are examples in every part of the world, including Vodafone, what they're doing in Europe.
Thank you. Again, Vikas, thank you. Certainly set the cat among the pigeons over here, so we'll see. But again, our time is up, so thank you for your participation. Thanks to the members of the jury and the participants over here who gave you your insights, and thanks for the panelists sharing this. Lula for IBM and for all of you folks over here. Again, session's over. Please go to the next session that is coming up over here between 4:15 and 5:30. In Hall A, right here, we have economic, social, and geographical inclusion through digital content. Hall B, you have shaping spectrum, harmonization, consolidation, that's all in spectrum. Hall C, you have infrastructure towards 4 trillion digital economy. You have the TRAI chairman participating, Aruna Sundarajan, who is our secretary, participating. Then you have last mile mobile digital divide, the language issue, and vernacular in India. That's in Hall D. So please participate in those as well. Thank you again for being patient with us. Again, thank you to the panelists. Bye.
Thank you, Rajan. And don't mind my jokes.
various reasons. Those
It's time, so we'll start the session and people will join us after the tea. So, we welcome all of you to the session on economic, social, and geographical inclusion through digital content. Our expert panelists will share their views on the importance of the digital channel and the possible framework to digitize different sectors and to enable India's transformation into a smart economy. Now I'll request the esteemed dignitaries to be seated at the dais. Mr. Sachin Seth, Partner Digital, FinTech and Innovation Practice Leader with Financial Services Advisory EY India. Mr. Arvind Bali, CEO Videocon Telecom and Walcom. Ms. Sapna Chadda, Marketing Lead Southeast Asia and India Google. Dr. Rajat Kathuria, Director and Chief Executive Officer ICRIER. Mr. Venugopal Iyengar, Chief Operating Officer Apalya. And last but not the least, Dr. Robert Pepper, Head Global Connectivity, Policy and Planning, Facebook. Thank you all the speakers for being with us today. It's a big hall. And to begin with, we have a small attendance, but let's not let it be a deterrent. I'll now request the moderator, Mr. Sachin Seth, to take over and proceed with the session.
Hello? Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I do see that we have a big hall and, you know, very few audience, but I do see people walking in, and I'm first of all, we are thankful for the people who are making attempt or effort to basically, you know, participate in the sessions and engage with the, you know, the speakers. And so we look forward to having a very engaging session. Feel free to have any questions. And so while we have a round of discussions we'll have on the panel, we would be happy to answer any questions from the audience post the panel. Yeah. So let me quickly introduce myself, and then I'll request other panelists also to have a brief, quick introduction. And then we get into, you know, bit of a debate, discussion, sharing of our point of view, etc., on the topic, which is basically how do we have digital content, you know, getting more and more imbibed and absorbed in the life of Indians from rural or, you know, urban side, and, you know, all parts of whether it's a geographical, socio-economical, and all basically aspects of the life of Indians, right? So my quick introduction is I'm Sachin Seth. I represent Ernst & Young, and I'm a partner in Ernst & Young. I take care of digital, fintech, and innovation. And my core competence areas are around financial inclusion, financial services, using you know, technology for the benefit of the masses, and trying to basically work towards how do we have better financial literacy in the country using all the possible digital means, right? Now, so I'll request other panelists. So I'll request Sapna to have a brief introduction, and then with Mr. Bali and Dr. Pepper and Venu as well. Yeah, please, Sapna.
Hi, I'm Sapna Chadda. I head marketing for Google in India and Southeast Asia. I've spent half of my career in India and half in the US. My day job is working on getting users to use Google products and to drive growth of Google's products. But I'm here today because of passion around getting India enabled and empowering every Indian with a connected internet.
Mr. Bali,
I am Arvind Bali. I'm CEO for Videocon Telecom and Videocon Volcam. Volcam is our new business line where we are going to be securities and service providers for end-to-end solutions. I've been with Videocon for the last 24 years, total 35 years experience in varied industries, have handled different profiles, starting from industrial marketing to telecom to now security surveillance. So I think I'll be more talking about technology and stuff like that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Bali. Dr. Pepper, would you like to introduce yourself?
Robert Pepper. I help lead our activities on global connectivity policy and planning. So I work with a lot of operators around the world, and it's very exciting to be in India. We're working with a number of the operators here. And I will talk in a moment about what we see you know, happening in India, which is really amazing. The changes, the enthusiasm, the market shifts are really fundamental. And India is becoming one of the global leaders on both the supply side and the demand side that's leading to adoption of the internet across the world. For us, there are 3 billion people connected to the internet globally. For us, the question is, how do we get the next 4 billion people connected? I know we're talking about the next billion here this week, but we also are focusing on the next 4 billion.
Venu?
Hi, everyone. I'm Venu. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Apalya Technologies. We are a mobile video and OTT over-the-top media delivery technology company. We essentially own and manage technology platforms that help content creators, media owners to distribute their content across networks, across operating systems, devices, in a seamless fashion. We also pioneered mobile video in this country way back in 2005, by streaming TV on the mobile at a time when it was probably foolish, but we did that anyway. And one of the things that the reason I'm here on this panel is really because we find entertainment is really the first step. Entertainment, infotainment, video of any sort is really the first step, which brings about a cultural inclusion that can then familiarize you with the device and technology that eggs you on to do more in terms of commercial activity and things related to your livelihood. And it's not a jump that we see the consumer making straight up, and they need to start getting comfortable with the technology and the device first. And that's where we see our role coming in by having served a lot of people who are first-time users and are also probably only accessing this one screen and no other screen. So that's really the subject around which I'd like to talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, Venu. Thank you. So thank you to all our eminent panelists. So to start the discussion, so as you see, I mean, we have the panelists from diverse background. We have some of the global leaders, like say Dr. Pepper, who is from Facebook. We have the CEO of telecom company, Mr. Bali. We have representation from Google. Sapna is representing Google, and we also have content provider or the new age companies like Apalia. So Venu is representing that, right? So as we see the intent today we have is to see that how does content, which is digitally transmitted, digitally transported, to basically uplift the socio-economic and geographic inclusion of the country, and it's in various aspects, right? Just to set the context before I get my other colleague panelists to talk about it. What I see is that today in India there is a huge focus on healthcare, education, employment, financial inclusion, and none of these things actually can be achieved without having adoption of the digital content or a digital means across the India till the last mile, right? And I'm sure there are many more such areas. So while our government is taking very bold, concrete steps, last couple of years things have been moving very fast. Corporates like telecom companies, content providers, social media companies are doing their bit, but definitely there is a lot more to be done, right? So from that perspective, let me start the discussion by inviting Dr. Robert Pepper to talk about, some global benchmarks, a global study what Facebook has carried out with on this aspect, and let's understand that where we stand in the global context, how the trend has been in last 12 to 24 months, and then from there on, what's the road ahead kind of thing, and then we can have the views from other panelists on that point of view. Yeah. So Dr. Robert Pepper, please.
Thank you very much. We recently completed a study with the Economist Intelligence Unit. They did all the number collection and the data analysis. And it looked at 75 countries, including India. And they collected data on 46 indicators for each country. And when they did the analysis, we ended up doing, these variables ended up clustering into 4 areas. Availability, affordability, relevance, and readiness. And if you think about availability and part of the affordability variable or cluster, that's supply side. And we've been talking a lot about supply side, and what's great about COAI AI is it is the supply side. It's the networks, right? It's the building out of the broadband. Without that, nothing else happens. But if we were looking at adoption and use and benefits from being connected, that's the demand side. And in fact, one of our top-line conclusions from the study was that internet inclusion is more than just being connected. It is having the ability and using the internet and the applications on the internet for social and economic benefit at the personal level, at the community level, and at the national level. So that was one of our big takeaways. Another big takeaway was that we're beginning to see a major shift on the content side. If you go back even just 5 years, the majority of the content on the internet globally was in English. That's no longer the case. I'll talk a little bit more about that. That's really good news. We also found that while a lot of people in the world are connected, the majority of the connected world is underconnected. And based upon the data, all right, so we released the study in 2017. The data is based on 2016. So it was pre-geo, right? And so what I would expect, and we'll talk about this, is that when we complete this year's study and release it next year, it will have the geo effect. Competition actually makes a difference. But by underconnected, if you're connected only with a 2G signal, you cannot access the full internet. Even 3G, it struggles. You really need an LTE, a 4G connection, in order to be able to have access to all of the rich applications and all of the features of those rich applications in order to gain the benefit. I'll come back to some details on India on that. Another takeaway, which is a surprise, the other ones were all good because the other takeaways, we're seeing positive trends. The last of these, there were a number, but the last one I want to mention right now is that we were surprised and disappointed to see that the gender gap on the internet is growing, not shrinking. And we cannot have an inclusive internet if half the population is not connected to the internet. So those are some of the global top line, and let me come to some India conclusions. First, what I think is really interesting is if you take a look at the general sort of trends in adoption of internet and services and technology. The normal trend is you start with supply side as kind of a push, and then applications and usage develops. But a really interesting thing happened 2 years ago here in India that really flipped that model upside down here. The very quick deployment and use of the unique ID changed that. What we're seeing in India is that demand is pulling supply rather than supply pushing demand. And that's unique. And that's made a huge difference. And that was a decision by government, right? So one of the things that we also see is the importance of the partnership between the private sector and government creating the enabling, environment, and the private sector making the investments built on top of that. So what about some of the specific metrics in India? So globally, the global average for internet users, it's actually measured on a percentage of households connected to the internet. Globally, that's 43%. In Asia Pacific, it's 47%. I'm not even going to get to North America or Europe, but I'm happy to, for comparison, go there. In India, it's only, this was again 2016 data, only 20%. Average, so in network performance, and this is extremely important, this goes to the underconnected question. Average mobile upload speed globally was about 5 megabits per second. In Asia Pacific, it was 6 megabits per second. In India, it was only 2.2 megabits per second. And that's because of the predominance, and that, by the way, it's a blend between mobile and fixed. So that's a reflection of a lot of 2G and only the beginning of 3G, again, pre-Geo. Average download, Asia Pacific was over 12 megabits per second. India was only 5.6 megabits per second. Latency, which is a really important variable if you want to have the rich applications on the internet, like video, you need less than 100 milliseconds. India was 140 milliseconds. The rest of Asia Pacific was 95. When you got to places like Europe, it was 63 milliseconds. And then if we took a look at the coverage, again, this was picked up the beginning of Geo, but 93%, 99%, 95% of Asia Pacific and India, 2G. There's some pockets where there's no 2G, but it was basically 2G. 3G available only to 75%. And in the early stage of Geo, right, it was 2016 data, so it's just beginning, less than 40% of people had access to 4G. Now that's going to be, that was available. It wasn't subscribing, it was coverage available. That now is going to be dramatically changed. Final metric on this part of it, the gender gap. So if you look at the ratio of women to men using the internet, and if in fact it was completely inclusive, it would be the same. It would be 100% women compared to men. In Asia Pacific, it was 42%. In Africa, it was 12%. In India, it was only 7%. That was one of the largest gaps, and I know that you're going to address that. Some of this is economic. Most of it is cultural. But what's interesting is, some of the countries that have relatively high usage of the internet by women are not those that you would think that would, right? So the neighbor to the west, Pakistan, has an only 5%, right? Very comparable to India. But in Saudi Arabia, 71%. And you wouldn't necessarily think that, given that they've only now, this week, legalized women to drive in Saudi. But they have a relatively high adoption and usage rate of the internet by women. So that's something I think that we will talk about that's extremely important. Finally, one of the things that we do also with the study is we take a look for each country at strengths and areas that need some work, where opportunity is. And we look at that in terms of availability, affordability, relevance, and readiness. Where India does really well, and it's actually tied at the top globally, so it's tied at number 1 out of the 75 countries, is on policy. Because the policy environment, the regulatory environment, sometimes things take a little long, right? We all know that. We've talked about that this week. But the fact is, the legal framework, the rule of law, the process, although it takes time, in terms of the policies here, actually are as good as the policies anywhere. They measure up. So that, by the way, is a really important strength, because you build on that. Another really strong strength is the competitive environment. Out of the 75 countries you looked at, India was 22nd. In Asia Pacific, out of 22 countries, it was 5th. The competitive environment, as we know, right, especially on mobile and voice, it's very competitive. In fact, some of the operators would say too competitive. And there's some things going on in the market. We'll see where that ends up. So it's easy to talk about where you have strengths, but it's more important to talk about the areas where you can really improve. One of those is usage. So although, this is the 20% only 20% of people were actually on the internet. So the usage, out of 22 countries in Asia, India ranked 19th. Out of the world, it ranked 55 out of 75. Price. This was not price for voice, it was the price for broadband, and this is the pre-Geo world. Broadband in India a year ago, and from the data, was very expensive. India ranked 51st out of 75. And those were and by the way, what's important is price included, or includes in the model, the cost of the handset and terminal equipment as a percentage of monthly income, the price for both mobile, prepay and postpay broadband, and fixed broadband as a percentage of monthly income. So it's not an absolute number. It has to be relative to the ability to pay. Now, I think what I would expect is that the study that we're working on now, based upon this year's data, when that's released, I would expect India to have jumped in the rankings and dramatically improved, especially on the price and the usage. And the third area for areas of improvement was network quality, because again, it was mostly 2G. So I'm expecting that I'm an optimist, but I think there's real evidence of it because we've seen it this week. And we go out to the floor here and we look at what's going on in terms of startups and technology and developments and the excitement, the momentum that's been created, the action that's been created, that I would expect that there's going to be dramatic changes when we look at the data next year based upon what's been happening here in India. In all my work globally, right at the moment, I find India to be the most dynamic and innovative market in terms of internet and applications and what's happening in terms of mobile networks. There's no place like it right now in the world. No place. And it's really, it's a great time to be here. It's a really, really exciting time to be here. And I also want to, again, congratulate the organizers for the India Mobile Congress for the first time. This is, it's not easy to put something on like this, and they've done a fabulous job. So I'll stop there, and I'll come back on some of the content issues specifically when we continue the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Pepper. I think that was very insightful. So in fact, I must say, I think you have shown us a mirror. Basically, it's a mirror for us, so which means we all feel, we are all, we have been celebrating the success of telecom in India for last, say, couple of decades, and we talk about there are, say, 1 billion people having mobile phone, everybody is connected, and there are a lot of schemes or the propositions which are offered by the government and the corporate sector. But I think some of the things you pointed out, I will just summarize them, and I will request other panelists to throw more light on that. Like you said that from policy perspective, we are probably among the best, let's say, which means that shows that our government and our corporates are working together to basically, progress on overall, development of the sector and the, benefits to the, common man. But you talked about supply latency, still people using 2G, so which means that I would say the technological advancement has not yet reached to all the networks, right? Infrastructure issues, and also the gender inequality in terms of the usage, right? I think these are the couple of points I picked up, and these are very, very relevant points for the conversation. So I'll request Mr. Bali to, because Mr. Bali is the CEO of a telecom company, and he has insights into that, what goes on to building a network and where we are in terms of basically network penetration. When we say we have 100 crore people or 1 billion people already on the mobile, why do we still have gaps in where we are, should be compared to the rest of the world, right? So I'll take Mr. Bali's inputs on that, and then probably I'll go to Sapna to talk about the gender inequality. I think that's a very important topic, yeah. So, Mr. Bali.
So as you know, this year's Congress theme is that connecting the next billion, and when we are talking about this connecting the next billion, we are actually talking about rural as we normally say that we have India and Bharat, right? And 70% of India's population lives in villages. And I think most of the things what I'll be talking is more about rural, because as far as urban part is concerned, things are a bit different. You know, first of all, just taking you to the background of this industry, as on today, you know, when we compare our industry in any area, you know, like we are probably at par with the rest of the world as far as technology is concerned. The time when the world was talking about 4G, we also had 4G. When we talk about phones, devices, everything, we are more or less at par with the world. But where we are lagging is, there are some very basic things, which is infrastructure. You know, you can put the equipment, but ultimately, you know, it has to perform, it has to work. And the issue, and the biggest issue is when these equipments have to work in a rural area. Now, we just heard Mr. Pepper saying that I think in coming times or otherwise, you know, for broadband, if we are talking, at least 1 Mbps is the basic speed what we should have. Now, 1 Mbps, 2 Mbps speed in rural areas is still a dream. You know, getting that is a very, very big challenge. And reason for that is that multiple factors. One, putting infrastructure itself is a very big challenge. One, from cost point of view, and second, from logistics and other things. Cost point of view, because, you know, as in private operators, when you have to put a network, that network has to actually like sustain its own running cost. And there has to be so many subscribers to pay the revenues. And ultimately, you know, like it is nothing but business. The revenue what you get and the cost you spend, that there has to be some balance. And unfortunately, in India, the tariffs are low and cost of infrastructure is very high. And then because companies get discouraged to put a lot of infrastructure in rural and villages areas. One big change, you know, with the rest of the world when we compare ourselves, like for example, if we want to compare with European countries or any other country, when wireless networks came in 90s, you know, 90, 91, 92, around that time, most of the world had 60-70% of their populations covered with wired networks. In India, at that time, penetration was not even 6-7%. You know, we didn't have wired network, and that too also few phones in urban and in rural areas, there was hardly any phone. Maximum maybe one phone in a panchayat or somewhere, but that was also missing in most of the villages. Now, those people were able to keep a lot of their traffic, broadband traffic, on wired networks, whereas in our case, you know, everything is on wireless network. The wireless networks has got its own issues, problems, as tower costs are very high. Then, you know, when you have a tower, India has got its own unique problems. Like I think some of the people can really don't understand when you're running the network. One is, you know, you have to put a network. That means electronics, equipment, towers, height, all that you have to do. Then you have to make sure that it gets uninterrupted power supply. That means you have to spend a lot of money on batteries. And then, you know, batteries also have got limited life, 4 hours, 6 hours. Now, if power is not there for more than 4 or 6 hours, then you have to have generators. Then there is a cost of generators. And over and above that, the absolute unique cost what India needs is that even on all those sites, you have to put a watchman, a chowkidar. Right, that is to make sure that, you know, nobody should steal your equipment. Now it may or may not be of any worth to anyone, but, you know, like there is a habit in most of the places, I would say, that if something is of public, and unfortunately networks are considered as a public property, you know, like, and if there is no chowkidar, people will just try to destroy that, steal the things, break it, damage it. So I personally feel that ultimately, though, you know, data shows that in rural area also there is a lot of data consumption, but it is actually dependent on a lot of movie content downloads, right? And downloads is something, you know, which you can just put it on your computer and it takes sometimes few hours, few days, doesn't matter. Whenever network is available, it downloads. So we have actually two very big variables, like in rural, even today, if you go slightly outside Delhi, having electricity during daytime is a luxury. You know, most of people say that why you need it during daytime, there's sunlight, you know, you don't actually need power during daytime. And then, you know, in case of towers and all that, you don't have power supply. Over and above that, you have got fiber cuts, then the equipment theft, all those things, they complicate the thing so much that rural network quality is always a problem. And I think something really big and large has to be done to change the things over there. We have got the right direction. I think need for digital is definitely well established. Government programs are all very well designed around that. And Dhanjan Yojana and all those things are really something very great initiative. But I think the big change what we need to bring is that as far as this infrastructure is concerned, the way, you know, government is giving protection to electricity as an essential service, like this should also be sort of an essential service so that nobody should temper it, destroy it, and at least ensure that it is available uninterrupted.
Thank you, Mr. Bali. I think that was very insightful. So on a lighter note, I thought when people talk about telecom industry increasing the employment, I thought, you know, it is helping people get, you know, educated and using the content, they can basically create employment for themselves. But Mr. Bali gave a new dimension that, you know, every tower you put or every equipment you put, you need actually the watchman to protect it, and that increases the employment. So that was, you know, completely a different, you know, thought process. So I think we will, while our focus is to use the content, so we'll come back on that point. So Sapna, you know, you again represent a global social media company, which is almost there in life of everyone all over the world. And you have, you know, your company, Google, basically, you know, looks at the data from all angles and sees that where the content is being searched, being absorbed, etc. So I have two questions to you. One is obviously that, you know, India, where do you think India is unique? It's different, or where we are doing better than others? That's one. And second, I think the point Dr. Pepper talked about, gender inequality or the access to the, you know, the content, digital content or the internet access, compared to many of the other conservative, you know, geographies. India is supposedly be one of the largest democracies, and it is the one which is where the gender equality is supposedly be very high in our social life. So where we are lagging. So these two things request you to, you know, throw light on that. Sure.
So we're not a social media company. We're beyond a social media company or a technology player.
Okay, sorry.
Across
for
across
that.
various. So I'll start with your second question, and I want to thank Dr. Pepper for his perspective around the gender gap. And I think the conversation around this actually has been quite limited up until recently. And so I appreciate that we need to talk about this more, so thank you for raising this. And it's good to know that our numbers are actually adding up. We have been looking at data for the last several years around gender at Google, and it's been disturbing. What we've seen is that only 1 out of every 10 internet users in rural India is a woman. And this is surprising to people. If you think about it, 1 in 10, that is, you know, that's unforgiving. And as, you know, as a company, our mission is to make sure there's universal access to the internet, and we are far from universal. And I think when you look at the other set of the countries in the list, I think, you know, it's actually should be really, really disturbing us. I represent a number of countries across Asia, Indonesia being one of them, which is actually at the same sort of evolution of internet adoption, yet they have zero issue with a gender gap. There's 50-50 usage. Africa is better than we are. The Middle East is in a better situation, and this is something that should really, we need to consider. And the drivers of this are a few things from the studies that we've done. One, it's access and affordability. The good news is, I think on this, the dimensions are changing and the world is changing. Jio has made it affordable. Phone prices are coming down. So access and affordability, I think, as an issue will go away. The harder ones to change are more cultural and socioeconomic. So relevance. So people don't think the internet perhaps is relevant to them, or they don't understand what they can get. Why? Because there's not enough discussion about it. They're prevented from using it. They're not allowed, right? Like, this is not the country that I live in, where women should not be allowed to use something. And we've taken this on to say, how do we make this more relevant to women? And what we see is that when women are given access to the internet, it can change their life. And we've recently done a study where we've gone into villages, where we've enabled all of the women in a village with devices and education, and we've skilled them. And we've studied how do they feel afterwards. 33% of them say that they and their family are more economically better and they have an improved situation just because of access to the internet. Why? Because internet can save them time. The internet gives them information that they never had access to before. They can get employment. I mean, I've met people who said that they've found jobs on the internet. I mean, it can solve a number of things, but if they don't think it's relevant to them, that means there's a gap in terms of awareness, and that's something that we need to spend time on. But I think ultimately it's in the social and cultural thread that we need to make change. So we, as Google, we're going village at a time. I'm proud to say we've reached 100,000 villages where we've trained women, but we can't do this alone. And I think what's heartening to see is there's organizations across the board that are trying to support this. But ultimately, the change has to come by communities wanting to see the help and improvement for themselves. The good news is that when they do see the relevance, it changes their life. And so what I'll say in terms of what's going well, I think this is what's going well, is that, like you said, demand is pulling, right? And we see that it's not, once price is not a barrier, Indians will use the internet and in creative ways. And I think the creativity of India is what our greatest strength is. And you see businesses burgeoning out of this. You see interesting use cases. You see adoption take off in ways that it's very, very compelling, right? If you look at digital payments, the way digital payments have been adopted in India is unsurpassed anywhere else in the world. And so this is where I think India has the large opportunity. Is we can make change fast, right? We just have to get the factors in the direction. But ultimately, it's going to take big social change, and I think I think the government is starting to work closely on this, but that has to happen faster.
Sure, Sapna. I think that was very insightful. So, we all look forward to basically Indian, women also using a lot more. I think the statistics you gave is 1:10 is really shocking, because we are assuming that in urban side of India, obviously the ratio would be much better. But
it's not that much better. So it's better, but it's not that much better. So in urban India, it's 3 out of 10.
Okay.
Right. So now you might think that's a good number, but the rest of the world, like I said, Indonesia, other underdeveloped countries are 5 out of 10. So we're still far way off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I said better means it's relative. Yeah, but yes, 3 out of 1 is also not a great number to have, right? So coming to Venu, who basically Venu is doing a lot of work on digital content and OTT, and basically helping telecoms, helping media companies transmit their content over the top or over the alternate channels. So I think it's all about eventually that what are the use cases of content? What is that people see value of that content in their life? Content could be about entertainment, content could be about education, it could be about financial literacy, it could be about any of those things. So Venu has been there in this field for almost a decade plus. So Venu, what do you think? What can make India adopt a lot more uses of internet, especially in the rural parts of it, and what kind of content would help people to improve their life as well as improve the penetration or adoption of the internet?
Yeah, thanks, Sachin. I think a lot of what Robert and Sapna just mentioned are relevant to the adoption of content as well. And when we talk about inclusion, it's as we see, it's not just rural as we understand it. At a gender level, also Sapna's hinting at both rural and urban areas not being as inclusive as we would like. So having delivered content over mobile and now over multi-screen as an OTT platform for many of our customers, what Apalya has seen through its evolution is entertainment. While you look at the weighty topics of healthcare and finance, banking here, I think there are a couple of important barriers that we, in our experience, saw that were deterrents for people to adopt. Number one, the device as the means to access this world of information and utility. The device was the first one. You need to get comfortable with that, and then within the device, the format of what was being provided also was a significant and continues to be a significant deterrent. What I mean by that is, for a lot of first-time buyers, I mean, in our mobile video business, Apalya, started seeing that during our consumer research, for a lot of the users of our service, we used to think that this was a second screen. We would love to call this, a lot of tech media had kind of labeled this as a second screen. For a lot of the users that we served, almost 40% to be precise, this was actually not just their first screen, it was their only screen. Many of them did not own televisions. This was, between the 2007, 2013 kind of phase. And the number is still pretty significant even now. So number one, you're talking about providing access to friendlier content, entertainment content as a means of cultural inclusion at the first step to somebody who did not have that, who was not in touch with a significant part of what was happening in the world outside. So that's a first step. That kind of starts bringing them closer to a device which can do a lot more than just be in touch with friends and family and probably means of livelihood. So one, we need to get them to be comfortable with the device, and I think entertainment / infotainment / social networks and what the world is up to is a good stepping stone towards getting people to move to a more serious, more important next step, being financial inclusion. That's one. The other is the format in what we're doing. I mean, simple things like languaging, right? Now, in a country like ours, with the multiplicity of languages we have, we would think we grew up with this knowledge, but no. it's only in the last few years that that the importance of languaging as a means to get people to adopt or use the internet more or use the device more is actually being worked upon. We might have known this in theory. I did a decade and a half in television, in media, and I know that transition was a very reluctant one, even in TV. The time it took for us to kind of embrace local languaging and accept regional language diversity to really bring a larger audience into the mix, it took a while. And even then, it was the content creating team that did, and then the marketing team would still live in its English world, right? Creating advertising in English, writing Hindi words in English language, right? And that transition took a good 5 more years after the content shifted. So it's been a fairly, reluctant journey for something that we knew intuitively was the key to connecting with a larger population in this country. We always knew that, but it's been a reluctant journey. And you're seeing that with the internet. Having said that, now, with the languaging efforts that we are seeing through a Google or a Facebook or other larger networks, that realization is dawning, and we are seeing that impact. For instance, in our apps, we have the app language can be changed to whatever local, be it a Hindi or a Tamil or a Telugu or a Marathi. It can be changed, and when we did that about 4 years ago, we thought it was just a cool differentiator, right? As it turned out, it started getting used pretty heavily. The other thing that you see is when you push these notifications and you write it in English, which used to be 2 years ago, and since the last couple of years we've been pushing it out in local language, you see immediately a 2% translating into 11 to 12%, and you're seeing that upticks now. This should intuitively be in knowledge. I think these are the kind of things that when you do, you bring the medium closer and connect better with the audience that you're serving. The next step, of course, is voice and video. I know there is a ton of work, and Sapna had some interesting insights to share on the use of voice search, and we believe on all our applications, content applications, that's going to have a role to play. Video is the easiest form of communication, very language agnostic if you can keep it local. You do not need a very high level of literacy to kind of get to video. So that will obviously help you penetrate faster. And of course, anything that's voice-based is already solving that text problem. So I think those are the kind of things that we as technology companies and content creators need to do to aid this process of influence. I mean, I'm not denying the importance of infrastructure, but that's not the only thing that one needs to work on. I think the content creators and the technology platforms and providers like ourselves also has a responsibility towards inclusion, and this is what we can do to really bring that about faster. Yeah.
Thanks, Venu. I think, thank you. That was pretty insightful, because at the end of the day, eventually all the infrastructure is being put to place to basically deliver the content. And if the content is not in the local languages or not in the form and shape which people can absorb or people can basically use it, definitely there is a challenge. So, Dr. Pepper, you would like to make a comment on that?
Yeah. So one of the things I said I wanted to come back to is what are the drivers on the demand side. And when I talk about relevance and readiness, the ID is part of readiness, right? And that's a huge difference here than anywhere on that variable. Some of the other readiness are some of the digital skills to access and use. That's part of the digital training. There's some issues with language, especially in a country with so many languages. One of the things that we know from a very important benchmarking study that was done in Brazil about 4 years ago. In Brazil, 95% of the country has 3G available. In other words, some form of real internet data, but not full, but it's pretty good. 65% of people subscribe. So the question was, they asked the 35% who could, so it was available, but they didn't subscribe. Why? The first thing people think of is affordability, right? People could tick off multiple answers. Only 23% of people said they could not afford. 70% of people said they didn't know how. That's readiness. 70% of people said they didn't see a reason why they should. That's relevance. So if we're talking about connecting the next billion, even where it's available, we have to still work on the supply side here, right? But even where it's available, there are people who are not connecting, and that's why relevance that you raised and the content is important. So we probed on that in the study, and we found 4 types of content really are important and drive relevance. One we've already talked about: local content in local language, extremely important. But where you have, it's also part of the readiness and skills, because if people are not literate, right, or they've never typed or keyboarded, that's a skill issue. As we move into a world of video and voice commands, and you might want to talk about that from the work that you're doing at Google, that changes the readiness issue. It makes it easier. But on the local content and local language, that's important. That's 1. 2 is e-commerce. Now, we're at the beginning of a revolution on e-commerce here. Look at Flipkart. Right? Amazon is struggling as number 2. They're not used to being number 2 anywhere. E-commerce here is really taking off. That makes it very relevant. People who are conducting transactions, they're doing things that actually help them in their lives. That's very relevant. If I can order something and have it delivered, it's faster. I don't have to spend time doing that. I spend more time with my family or whatever. So e-commerce is a driver. E-gov applications, it turns out, is one of the most of the 4, as important as local content, local language. It's the things that the transactions that you can do with your local government. It's also getting information from government. It's about citizenship, it's about participation, it's education, it's healthcare. Those are eGov applications, and that squarely is something that government can do, and the government here has been working on it, but that's also something that has been classically, where successful, a public-private partnership. The private sector helping and working with government to build the applications, to take the government services to the people, right? And then the fourth, e-entertainment. Don't forget e-entertainment. And what's interesting is, I mean, of course, everything here with local content and Bollywood and everything that you talked about, there's a huge opportunity. In some countries that you would think that's obvious, it's not. And you have to put all of these things together. Last comment. You were talking about some of the barriers to rural areas, and those are, on the supply side, non-trivial. We've done some work being on a very granular level. It turns out that in addition to power, which is clear, in terms of the ability for the network operators to go from 2G to 4G, especially in rural areas, there's a number of things, but the two big issues. Number one, they need more spectrum. Without more spectrum, you're not going to have it. If you want broadband, you need broadbands. Number two, backhaul. Without fiber backhaul, you cannot scale to real broadband. Because the way you connect the cell towers on your traditional mobile voice network, it's a narrow, skinny connection. It's an E1 or something, or it's a microwave link, or a satellite link. You cannot do broadband on that. In fact, you cannot even have one smartphone connected, because most of the E1s are 2 megabits. The smartphone will be a symmetric 10 megabits. And then, the gigabits being consumed now on the GEO network, right? Backhaul is the barrier. You need fiber or what we call virtual fiber, radios that are giving you fiber-like connections backhaul to the areas. That is why the BharatNet is so essential. Taking fiber to the 250,000 gram panchayats is going to, in my mind, sort of break that barrier by bringing to rural India the fiber backhaul that any of the operators then can connect into. That's a huge barrier globally, right? And so it's taken a little longer than people had hoped, but we're now on the path, right? We heard yesterday, a year and a half from now, all 250,000 panchayat will be connected. In the past, people were saying in 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, but actually we're now making progress. And it's being built. It's there. That is huge, and that's going to really accelerate and reduce the costs to the operators to be able to scale. Last point, in terms of cost reduction on the supply side. We have, 2 years ago, we pulled together a number of companies, and we helped create something called the Telecommunications Infrastructure Project, TIP. And we recognized that the cost of network technology was too expensive. And the idea was to drive the cost of network technology down, drive it down. 5 companies started this. Facebook, Intel, you need the chip guys, Deutsche Telekom, the German operator, and Korea Telecom, right? The 5th might be a little surprising. It was Nokia. Because Nokia was in the middle of the transition with Alcatel. You would think that Nokia would not want to have lower cost technology because it's a vendor of technology, but it understood that if it was not part of this disruptive change in the fundamental technology driving costs down for the operators, they'd be left behind. Today, there are over 450 companies that are part of the TIP project. The idea is open sourcing, reference designs, making the technology available to any operator to be able to drive their costs down. And some of the other vendors have now joined, not all of them. More chip companies have joined, little companies have joined, and by the way, most of the major operators in this country, not all, but most of the major operators in this country are members of the TIP project. So that's one of the things that we're doing, bringing people together to work collaboratively to drive the costs down to help the operators. Thank you.
Pretty insightful. I think that's a good, example. So, Mr. Bali, just your point of view on that. When we talk about BharatNet, I think as Dr. Pepper also mentioned that there has been a lot of talk about it. There is a lot of progress being made. 250,000 per gram panchayats are being connected, and there is a target for 2018 December. So how do you see that happening, and what kind of change it can bring to India in terms of delivery of basically the data services to citizens of the rural India especially, and consumption of the content basically at that last mile?
BharatNet is a very, very good project, and I think it is a very good initiative. And initially, yes, it was a bit slow. Now it has caught up the real momentum, and I'm very sure it'll meet its deadline, and we'll have connectivity among the villages. Most important part is, as I believe that unlike many other countries, in India, most of the time, we create a demand and then we look for the supply side, So here, already, people at large, they are feeling the need, they have already, because the word spreads very, very fast. When we started buying on Amazon and Flipkart, most of us, we started buying it for the reason because it was cheaper to buy, right? But then after some time, it is also a convenience to buy, right? But cheaper part is definitely there because, even if you come to know that there is a sale, physical sale happening somewhere, there is an inertia to move and go there, right? But if you know that something is happening on internet, you can very easily book it and take it. So even in rural India, there is a very big need now, demand now that, when other parts people are able to source things at a very attractive price, they can buy things at the discount sales, etc. We should also be doing. Besides that, a lot of government schemes are focused around that. So government schemes, government subsidies, everything, banking, everything will be moving on the internet, right? So because it is moving on the internet, so per se, there will be a lot of pressure, like local panchayat level, they'll put pressure on their leaders that, we should have in our village, we should have better connectivity. And if networks are not working, they demand more. The way today, the demand for water and electricity, they'll start demanding more for data. And then some of us believe that maybe data will be more needed than even power and water. People will be dependent more on data now. So I feel and I very strongly believe that the change that we will be seeing, I think more pressure will be coming from people's side. They'll put pressure on local bodies that we should have good network, we should have good speeds, so that we can also get benefit of whether it is on entertainment or utility or shopping or knowledge or any other front. Now, one thing which traditionally we have been seeing, India, from government point of view, it is also very important. The one thing what we have been seeing that, unlike many other places in the world, in India, people love to live in just 58 cities. Everybody wants to just move to those 58 cities because they feel that education, health, everything is better in all those places. And those cities are just reaching a stage, where it will be not possible to provide water, sanitation, and all those things. So, in developed countries, people love to rather live away from the main towns. Nobody wants to stay in downtown, people want to stay out, and they want to stay outskirts, right? And that is all because, they don't find quality of life is better in rural places. You have got better air, better quality, everything. So internet connectivity will bring that change. When you are away from main towns and you are connected, that means you are not missing entertainment, you are not missing education, you are not missing health, and most of the things you are connected, and you are at par with the world, then why you should come and live in cities, which in any case is not good for living, doesn't give you quality of life. Quality of life is in rural areas. So I think I have a very strong belief that I think the pressure will come more from rural side, from society as such that, we need this, give priority to this sector, and please try to provide us high-speed internet data so that, we also have equally good life in villages.
So Sapna, quick question and taking cue from what Dr. Pepper said. The Indians are using the voice-based, commands or voice-based sort of content a lot more, right? Why do you think so? What is the reason? I mean, why it's different compared to elsewhere? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a few things. I think we always leapfrog on certain technologies. India skipped the desktop, went straight to mobile. And I think we could see this adoption of voice input and voice leapfrogging as well. So it'll be interesting to see, but already we're seeing signs that India has one of the highest usage and penetration of voice. And it's fundamental, right? If the users in rural India haven't grown up with computers, they haven't been typing on keyboards, that said, we have to be ready for anything. And I think what's great is we are working on technologies because of machine learning and neural networks that exist now. Even on input into keyboards, it can work with translation, and things can be automated. So Google now has the Gboard, which has 22 languages. We can now input in, translate in 9 languages. And this is just the start. But it all comes down to, do people know? Are they aware? Are they jumping on into using this? And it's not intuitive, right? And so it all comes back to digital skills, and can we skill them so that they can use this? In the absence of skill, they do what they know how to do, which is speak. It's easy for them. And so we are seeing that adoption. So I think it's out of necessity that we're seeing the usage. But I think the opportunity that we have with machine learning and neural networks now to solve for some of the challenges around content is we're at a turning point. Ultimately we do need language, local language content. I think the stat is that 57% of all internet users are non-English speaking in India, but only 18% of the content consumption is non-English, right? So that's a problem. So we need to, at scale, get content available. And so there's an opportunity ahead of us, but there's a lot of work to do.
It's very interesting. So we are almost at the last leg. So just what Sapna said, I wanted to make a remark that I work with a lot of banks and financial institutions, and most of them say that people don't want to talk. They want to text. They want to chat. And that's why you see chatbots and a lot of self-service assistants are popular. But when I see rural India, which is what Sapna mentioned, because of low literacy levels, because of lack of comfort with the keyboard, people like to actually speak and use the voice commands. So I think we are seeing, two different India here. The urban part, youth, moving to more of texting, and the rural part, moving to more of a voice commands. But both are consuming the content and having a conversation or fulfilling their requirements, right?
So can I just make one comment? What we are seeing, which is interesting in rural areas, what people do on the internet is actually much more, it's with a lot of substance. So once they have the skills, it's not time pass stuff. They're finding ways to enrich their livelihood, right? And so it's not time pass, right? And that's what I think is interesting. So it's beyond text, if they know how. So we have to enable them on the how.
I think that's really interesting. So I think we are almost there. So I wanted to ask last question to our panelists, with a very brief answer, that one thing, if they want to highlight, which can, really help India leapfrog and, improve the penetration of the data, internet, uses of content, improvement in the life of people around agriculture, healthcare, education, employment, using internet, technology, mobile, what that one thing would be. So starting Venu from you want to share that one thing?
I mean, it's really tempting to point on the supply side and keep bemoaning the lack of infrastructure, and maybe that's the one thing that needs to be done. But what I'd rather focus on is what is the one thing that we could do that could trigger this, or that could catalyze the inclusion process. right? And for us, really, and for personally, I think localization, if we take that really to heart in every sense, in the sense localization of the technology, the interface that people are using, the technology that they're using, make it more intuitive and locally adaptable, which means prioritizing video over text or voice over text, right? In that sense, so truly keep that front and center, because whether we want to call it the next billion or whether, I think frankly, even in the current billion, there are a lot of people who could benefit from that. If you are talking about getting them really on board and engaged, then in every aspect of what you do, if you can localize and make this medium connect better with the user of today and of tomorrow, that would be it for me. So be it technology, be it user interface, be it the nature of content that's being created itself, across the board on all aspects, just think, how do you get this closer and make it more local and connect better? That would be the one thing.
Great, Renu. So, Dr. Robert Pepper?
One thing.
I know there are many you want to share.
Oh, there's many. So what I would want, the one thing would be to capture and accelerate the momentum that we've seen take hold in the last 2 years, right? And that means, and what do I mean by that? What we've seen is allowing and creating an environment and allowing more risk-taking, right? That's the startup culture that we've seen. Just go out to, all what we've seen this week. And so it's allow more risk-taking through what we call sometimes permissionless innovation, right? Allow the innovation, allow the risk-taking, and let's try things, right? And if they don't work, that's okay. We can try something else, but we can't really be completely innovative out of the box to continue this innovation momentum without taking risks.
Sure. So I think the philosophy which just says that, move fast, fail fast. So, even if it doesn't work, move on to the new things, but keep trying. I think that's what you want. Yeah, absolutely. So, Mr. Bali, you want to share that one thing which can basically push us to basically have more and more content absorbed by the people or consumed by the people?
Yeah, so in coming times, speeds and content, this is something which will be growing exponentially. And heart of all this is nothing but fiber. And in this country, quality of fiber is the worst, the poorest. Reason being, all the time civil work, what happens, road widening and other things. Fiber is a thing which gets damaged. There are some stretches, in Punjab, in our network, every 2 years we have to put new fiber. You just put a fiber and then the road widening takes place, again you have to put another fiber. So I think one thing which I would like to, if it is possible, as a government should pass, as a road specification, they should make it essential that whenever a new road is made, on the sides there should be tunnels in which fiber or electricity cable should be going so that it never gets damaged. And if it remains undamaged, I know it can provide such a high speed and such a good content and such a good stable service to the customers.
Very nice. Sapna?
Yeah, so for me it has to be skills. So skills across the board. Businesses and small businesses need to be digitally enabled. We need to digitally enable women, the elderly. We can see a change in India if we focus on digital skills. I think there's an assumption that it happens naturally and organically because that's what's happened in other parts of the world. But this is not other parts of the world. And so we need to build for the differences that India has. So digital skills across the board.
Sure, thank you. So open to audience. I know you have been very patient, listening to the engaging discussions among the panelists. So happy to have any questions from you for any specific panelists you would like to raise the question or you want to in general. Please go ahead, yeah. There is a mic, so yeah.
See, there is a lot of competition in this industry, so how will it impact the industry as a whole? I just want to know.
So, yeah, so I'll just clarify the question with you. What you're saying is there is a lot of competition in the industry, so how it will impact the industry as a whole. Now that you're talking about the competition in the telecommunication service providers or the content providers, or either service providers. Okay, sir, this question is to you.
Yeah, so as far as consumer and customers are concerned, this competition is very good for them. You know, customers are getting more and more content. All this surge what we see in the data is because data became so inexpensive. So I think this competition is also acting as a catalyst to take the penetration of data more into rural, because, you know, like, per capita income in rural areas is also very low, right? And for them, you know, maybe earlier it was a luxury to have data or phones. Now it is becoming more and more affordable. Now when competition increases, you know, you don't just reduce your tariffs. Then you realize that, you know, even if I have reduced the tariff, you know, whether the customer will be able to afford a device. So now, you know, competition is bringing even cheaper devices. So ultimately, you know, everything is for the customer's benefit, and it is increasing. I'll say it is helping the overall cause. Now, what is happening to the companies who are competing, that is a different topic.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question. So, yes, please, any more questions? I think, yeah, we have some questions here.
My question is with Sapna and Dr. Wood. We are doing rural sustainable employment exchange and setting up the 10,000 plus resource integration sustainable employment exchange in association with BSNL. Now the challenge here is to setting up the CSC and the setting up the connectivity to the primary health center. There are different solutions which are available in the ecosystem, but government themselves is not integrating with the single ownership matrix. Like we are providing resources integration sustainable employment program. Why we are doing? Because we did the police recruitment in almost 7 states of India. So the rejection of the police constables is the selection to the security guards. And rejection of the security guards is the selection to the housekeeping. In a similar manner, we are integrating the resources and mobilizing the resources to the and consuming in the local geography. So here the content plays a very important role. The reach out which Google and Facebook is having is bigger than the government. Because while deploying this network, we found this is a huge gap. Because in the top layer, we are talking much about the infrastructure, but when we go and deliver it, then we came to know that there is a content which is the missing out, and because of that, opportunity is missing, and the entire Skill India mission is getting dented out of it. So what is your roadmap to help the existing ecosystem? And we are not a big organization. We are a $120 million organization. It's just like a startup in front of Arvind's and the big giants like Airtel and Jio. But we are very much experienced and sustainable. So what is your roadmap to how we can associate with you and build this repository for sustainable rollout? Thank you.
So it's interesting. So we have gone through the same thing in terms of learning where the gap is, and we're still early in our stage of learning. The one thing we've realized in terms of rollout and you mentioned content, is that you have to think of content deployment very differently, and it has to be very community-based, and you have to involve the entire, like in the case of rural, the entire village. Everybody needs to take a part, which wouldn't normally be our model that we would have anywhere else. So that's so I think, you know, ultimately you need to think of different models. We're happy to share our learnings that we have. So we also are on a stage of determining how we can make the efforts that we have more sustainable. So perhaps we can talk offline. We're still building the roadmap. We're starting we're talking about the basics that need to be solved first before it sounds like what you're doing is slightly more evolved.
I think it's very, very similar. We have people, we also are learning. But one of the things that we have learned by working with local community organizations, groups, healthcare, small business in particular, is as a partner, because a lot of people use Facebook to communicate with friends and family. That's where it started, right? Our mission is about creating community, both physical and virtual. And we create community by connecting more people. So that is the core mission of creating community, which is exactly the type of thing that you're trying to do as well. And we have people who are doing that across India, right? But a lot of it's very bottom up. It's people using the application to connect with other people. So again, there's things that, again, we can talk offline, but what you're doing is exactly, why Mark created Facebook.
So thank you, Dr. Pepper and Sapna. So any questions? I can see in the second last row. Yes, I think this is the last question because of time constraints. So we will just take up this question and then we will conclude the session.
Thank you. I want to ask about how do we intend, or what are the ideas about connecting small enterprises? They play a big role. They also need to be connected to leverage the power of the internet. Any ideas around that?
Yeah, I think as far as whole digital initiatives are concerned, this is something which is helping SMEs probably the most. Because, like within no time, with least cost, you're able to access the best of the information. Like earlier times, large manufacturing units versus small manufacturing units, there used to be a very big difference. Today, in digital era, rather sometimes, small is better, small is more powerful. So smaller organizations, I think, can probably learn faster. And the other thing about internet is that you need not start from where others have started. You start from today, where others are. And SMEs have got that advantage. They can take from there onwards and grow business very fast. So that's why, you see that we have never seen so many startups, so many smaller organizations as has come in last 5-10 years. The reason is that it is becoming more and more easier, faster, and cost-effective to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Mr. Bali that actually technology or internet especially or digital means are, breaking the divide between the big and the small. Because a lot of, small and medium enterprises also have access to like very simple thing, like a loan. See, there are a lot of digital enabled means are available. So today when I'm working with the financial institutions every day, I find them making decisions very quickly for small and medium enterprises for lending requirement, working capital requirements, etc. Because all the data is available. They have PAN card or their income tax returns, and all this is digitally available. So today, a small and medium enterprise, even if you look at, the merchants who are on, let's say, Flipkart or Amazon or Paytm, today they are getting the access to the capital, access to the inventory online from, ecosystem, whether it's their supplier or whether it's the consumer or whether it's a bank. So I would say small and medium enterprises are getting a significant benefit. And that is also one of the themes of government is Startup India, which is government is driving the agenda to have, more and more easy access of various resources to the small and medium enterprise. And I think the access to the digital content would be also part of helping in that, yeah. So thank you very much for your participation and your engagement in this session. It was quite insightful, and our eminent panelists, I would like to thank you, all of you. So Venu, thank you so much for spending your time. Dr. Pepper, thank you for coming all the way from US, participating in Indian Mobile Congress. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Bali, and thank you, Sapna. Thanks a lot. So please have a good day and enjoy the rest of the sessions for today and tomorrow. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all the speakers. It was a very engaging and informative session. And the audience is definitely walking out smarter than when they came in. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.